This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. And how much credibility a couple of years ago, well, how many years back would we have to go? 4 years back? If I said to you that the Brexit is in the news and I'm not quite sure that I want to talk about it, you wouldn't have believed me, would you? I do want to talk about it today, but I can't quite see the line of inquiry that we will take together. I've got two front pages in front of me. I saw something quite clever this morning, because you know how we've been worried for a while that newspapers are the tail that wag the dog in a way. Fewer and fewer people actually read them, and yet the mainstream, and I use that word quite cautiously and reluctantly, but it does actually have a meaning beyond the worlds of conspiracy theories and weirdos. Mainstream media is still in many ways in lockstep with the newspapers. So in mainstream broadcast, what do we do in the morning? We look at the newspapers, decide what we're going to talk about, follow the news wires. In increasing alternative universes out there, of course, with heavily opinionated outlets, which I get it. So when I say there are two front pages today, I understand if you go, why are we still handcuffed to newspapers? But I saw something quite clever this morning, which actually marries the two worlds together. I wonder whether you've noticed this before. So what you will see if you spend a lot of time on social media and don't actually subscribe that much to mainstream media deliberately, explicitly, what you will see is a lot of photographs of front pages. So every major platform will have tomorrow's or today's front pages. So how many people read newspapers? Shrinking fast and soon to be negligible. How many people are part of the world where newspaper front pages are still currency? Almost everybody. I don't think this is a desperate attempt to defend myself against the march of time. I think it's a natural response. Front pages hit you, even if you haven't opened a newspaper in 20 years. And here are two. I mean, extraordinary to think that they've unfolded in the space of about 24 hours. One yesterday morning, one this morning. So yesterday's Mail on Sunday, Starmer's surrender squad to undo Brexit. PM accused of betraying historic 2016 vote to leave EU as 100-strong Whitehall unit is launched to tie Britain back to Brussels. And today, the iPaper, impartial news and intelligent debate being their tagline, a rather nifty new redesign recently undertaken. The front page of the iNewspaper today says, EU tells Starmer your Brexit reset is doomed without a better offer on fish and under 30s. And inside the newspaper, there's a much more detailed explanation of why many people in the European Union, many senior members of the European Union, are perfectly happy with the status quo as it is, and a little bit baffled as to why the Labour government seem to think they can ask for stuff without offering anything in return. So it's a strange one, isn't it? It's a really strange one. The British public, once again, are being quite badly let down, in a sense, because the idea that there is a yin and a yang here, Boris Johnson's mad rant in the Mail on one side, it's almost like a rerun of the original Brexit debate. Here you have the facts and the difficult reality in the iNewspaper, and here you have the mad quasi-xenophobic rant that is largely fact-free and entirely unevidenced in the Mail newspaper. But it works. We know that it works. I mean, if I was trying to drum up some fury, then I'd probably have focused on the fish story. If I was the editor of the Mail trying to excite my readership with untruths and exaggerations, I probably would have focused on the fish. Brussels eye, British fish. But maybe there's still a bit of shame and embarrassment attached to the betrayal of British fishermen, the British fishing industry by the madness of Brexit. I don't know. So, and here's the bit that surprised me. and Mail on Sunday not focusing exclusively on Boris Johnson, but largely when they write, last night critics warned that the Prime Minister was on the brink of jettisoning the freedoms and opportunities of Brexit. Oh, we must read that, mustn't we? But let's find out what they are, shall we? I'm sure that this journalist would have listed, if he's put in the third paragraph of the story, the freedoms and opportunities of Brexit. There might be turn to page 14 for a very long list of freedoms and opportunities. Let's have a look. No, there's nothing there at all, except some nonsense about becoming a rule taker rather than a rule maker. But of course, we used to be a rule maker, and it was the editorial policies of outfits like the Mail that removed us from that space. So it's a weird attempt to resurrect the battle on the right of the British media, and on the, or rather, smack in the middle of the British media, there's a rather sober warning that Keir Starmer will need to make major concessions to the EU if he wants new deals on trade and security. And Brussels will, of course, drive a hard bargain. So here, I think, is a bit of a penny drop moment for me. And like a lot of you, like a lot of people, I have been frustrated, but also, I suppose, forgiving of the newish government's lethargy in this space. The idea, the necessity of undoing some of the damage done by that ludicrous decision of 2016, while simultaneously having to respect it, has been a little bit puzzling to me. And I've wondered why Keir Starmer, for example, why has Keir Starmer not cited it more often when listing the negatives that he is compelled to deal with? I saw a little roundup of the trade. So say 4% hit to GDP is, I think, a conservative estimate. You could sign 10 new trade deals with smaller parts of the world. I think the CTTP one kicks in this week, and it's like 0.08%, or, I mean, tiny fractions of, if you like, repair to the damage that has been done. So why does Keir Starmer not point to it more? Why, when Rachel Reeves talks about our economic situation, doesn't she point at Brexit and explain the reality? And I've been wondering why. I've been puzzled as to why. I really have been puzzled as to why. I remember when Rishi Sunak did a flip chart. You remember he actually wrote a chart. He did a big picture in Downing Street about the threats and the damage that had been done to the UK economy. And he left off his entire picture the single biggest element in damage that has been recently done to the UK economy. But he had to, because he was in favour of it. He supported it, and he was part of the government that implemented it. But why would a Labour government come in and not make any? And now we know. Now we know why, I think, for two reasons. Number one is the opponents of this government, or the opponents of the reality of Brexit, the deniers, will try to turn it into an epic brouhaha at the first opportunity. But more pertinently for Starmer, who I don't think suffers from front pageophobia, more pertinently from Starmer, he probably knows that there's not a great deal he can achieve without making concessions. And the minute he makes concessions, the minute the flags go up, the bonfires are ignited by right-wing newspapers. So that's the challenge that Keir Starmer faces. On the one hand, reality. On the other hand, rhetoric. In many ways, the definition of all Brexit discussions. On the one hand, reality, which lost in 2016. On the other hand, rhetoric, which won. Very angry, rage-filled rhetoric, often borderline racist, always jingoistic. So reality, rhetoric. And Starmer has to somehow walk this tightrope. And I don't know how he does it. This is why I don't bite your arm off every morning that there is an opportunity to return to this territory. I'm a little keener to talk about it than I would be if I'd encouraged you not to vote for it, if I'd fallen for all the nonsense and all the lies, and then used my platform here to communicate to you that it would somehow be a good idea, when all of the evidence for almost anybody honest was that it would be a disaster. But I don't approach it with alacrity anymore, because I don't have the clarity and the certainty that I used to have. So I think you'll allow me to be immodest for a moment. If you're new to this program, you may not know this. Almost everything that has gone wrong was properly and somewhat ploddingly on occasion predicted by this program, not by me exclusively, but with the help of people who actually knew what they were talking about from the various sectors. And that meant that I could approach it with almost excitement, the knowledge that we were right, the knowledge that this was going to be a long process in seeing the lies fall apart, seeing the nonsense collapse. I didn't foresee the absolute shamelessness of the key salesmen and women of it. I didn't think that they'd be subscribing quite so quickly to the there is a brilliant Brexit, it goes to a different school idea, or the well, if only I'd been in charge it would have gone brilliantly, but I'm never going to provide any evidence or detail of how I could have done anything differently. I didn't think, and I'm a fool for not spotting that Boris Johnson would completely misrepresent it to get it through Parliament and then effectively disown it as soon as it was achieved. But I did know today was going to happen. I did know that the minute it looked like Keir Starmer was going to do anything to redress some of the damage done, then it would be resurrected. It would be reignited. It would be turned once again into a furious battle between rhetoric, the rhetoric of wrongness, but the appealing rhetoric of British exceptionalism, or whatever you want to call it, and reality, the reflection of reality that listening to anyone in Brussels provides. So the question that I've got for you this morning is, what should Keir Starmer do? I can see the attraction of doing absolutely nothing. This is why, and it's taken me a while to see this quite so clearly, it's taken me a while to understand why he has been so inactive and so unenthusiastic. He can't say to people who call themselves rejoiners, or people who insist that the journey back is inevitable, or people who, like me, have been baffled by the failure to point out the role that Brexit has played in our national decline, because it's not up to him what happens next. It's up to them. It is up to Brussels what he can and can't achieve, and he will have to make some concessions in order to achieve anything. So if he wants a new deal on security or on anything linked to trade, then he'll have to give something in return. I didn't fully appreciate that. You kind of cling to this notion that, you know, it's like when a couple break up and then they want to get back together, so they start dating again. It's nothing like that at all. This is literally leaving a club, surrendering all rights of club membership, and then trying to claw some back while not paying your subscription. So what are you going to give me instead? You've left the club. You want to come back on Mondays and use the treadmill. Do you remember how much fun we had with the sports club analogy? You want to come back on Monday, because Brexiters thought you could leave the club and then keep full access to absolutely everything. You just wouldn't have to pay your membership fees anymore. That's what I mean by the rhetoric of wrongness. So what we're trying to do is say, well, can we use the treadmill on Tuesdays, please? And they say, yeah, of course you can. What are you going to give us in return? Are you going to, I don't know, are you going to launder all the towels? Or are you going to mop out the shower? What are you going to give us in return? And it has to be something that feels like a concession. I mean, I don't know if it is a concession. I would have thought that free movement for the under-30s is good news for everybody, especially British under-30s who get 20-odd countries to visit, as opposed to European Union under-30s who just get one added to an already quite long list. So that's why the Labour government has not been an anti-Brexit government, because it knows that the reality of changing anything or doing anything is really, really tricky. So what do you think he should do? 0345 6060 973. He hasn't made any concessions yet, and right-wing media has gone after him like a rat up a drainpipe. I mean, truly unhinged headlines, unhinged coverage in both the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. He hasn't done anything yet. He's instructed some civil servants to look at ways of improving our current status. If he does anything, if he makes any concessions at all, I would have thought even now, even after the betrayal of the last few years, especially on fishing, which assumed this epic emotional heft during all Brexit discussions, if he does anything at all, they'll go absolutely bonkers. His polling is atrocious at the moment. I don't know that the kind of people susceptible to Daily Mail propaganda are likely to swing towards the Labour Party in any circumstances whatsoever, but you know, this notion of an unleavened diet of negativity and abuse being directed at the Labour leader. You knew it was coming. You didn't think it would be quite like this. So what on earth should Keir Starmer do? European diplomats say he needs to make major concessions if he wants new deals on trade and security. Brussels prepared to drive a hard bargain. Leaked negotiating documents, this is why the story in the Eye is so strong, show that the EU is demanding a new fishing agreement as a precondition to the start of any talks, plus easier migration for under-30s between the two sides. Okay? And then you might get a veterinary agreement in return, which would help farming and food trade, key part of Starmer's strategy. So the EU is offering Keir Starmer the chance to help British farming and improve food trade. And in response to that possibility, the Daily Mail's gone absolutely bonkers. So what on earth should he do? What should he do? 0345 6060 973. And listen, I don't want any... I mean, listen, I joke about the line in the Mail saying Britain is on the brink of jettisoning the freedoms and opportunities of Brexit. We all know there aren't any. Everybody knows that deep down. If you want to carry on pretending that there are, that's fine. But in terms of what do you want Keir Starmer to do, I don't want you to feel that you have to come at this from the undoing the damage. Maybe you still feel that that whatever it is that you won, whatever it is that you got was worth the economic damage, was worth the hits that are fairly well, was worth making fishing worse than it was before, was worth damaging food trade, was worth making food more expensive, was worth making food supply more sclerotic. I don't know what the trade-off would be, but I don't want this conversation to necessarily be confined to people who accept or consider it to be a no-brainer that Keir Starmer should be rebuilding ties with Brussels. So that's your question. What do you want him to, what do you think he should do? What do you want him to do? May not be exactly the same answers to the same question, but 2 front pages in 2 days, both focused on Brexit, both with the word Brexit in full-scale type on the front page of 2 national newspapers. What do you think the Prime Minister should do? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 20 minutes after 10. Frederick writes, I can't see you as I'm listening on the radio, but I can feel the smile on your face as you talk about Brexit. I, like so many, am on your side. Well, I'm not. I can't be on your side because I don't know what he should do here. I don't know what he should do, which is why I'm asking you. And the number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. Marks & Spencer opens warehouse to store Brexit paperwork is a story that perhaps you haven't seen in your news, depending on where you get it. This is Archie Norman revealing that the amount of paperwork needed just to export to the Republic of Ireland, where they have 16 stores, is such that they've had to hire an entire warehouse to store the paperwork needed for exports to a territory that was previously part of the free trade agreement. So previously there would be no paperwork, and now there is loads. So the reality of complicated trade, the reality of having made things worse is largely undeniable. But for the first time this morning, I understand why Keir Starmer hasn't done any of the things that people like me and possibly you wanted him to do. Because we go to Brussels almost cap in hand. We go to Brussels asking for things that are in their gift. We go to Brussels saying, can we please have this? And they respond by saying, yes, of course you can, but we want that. And that's why I don't know what he should do. I don't know what he should be doing behind closed doors. I don't know what he should be doing publicly. I don't know what he should be saying to the British public. That might be a good starting point. What do we want Keir Starmer to say to the British public about these necessary negotiations, but also, of course, about the likelihood of them succeeding, or about the reality of what might be achieved? This is what I meant when I said to you earlier that I'm not as bushy-tailed as I used to be when I come towards this kind of topic, because I actually don't have any answers to these questions. And looking at my switchboard at the moment, nor do you, to be honest, because it's really, really difficult. What should the Prime Minister be doing with regard to improving a difficult scenario while acknowledging it's not really up to him what happens next, it's up to them? Alan's in Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Can I be the first to wish you Merry Christmas? If that's not already on.
I don't. No, I haven't. I've had some lovely cards, and someone sent me some socks. But I think you're the first on air, so thank you for that, Alan. And the same, of course, to you and yours.
Thanks for keeping us all sane. No, hopefully these negotiations will be better than the last lot. When it was widely reported that David Davis went in after probably being in the bar. With a couple of sheets of A4, and Michel Barnier went in with reams and reams of documents.
It wasn't just reported, there were photographs. It was an extraordinary moment, wasn't it, when you realised that they really did believe all the stuff they said in the run-up to the referendum about they need us more than we need them, and the German car industry will come galloping to the rescue, and we'll be in Berlin the morning after the result, not Brussels. I mean, epic ignorance, but it's still alive. You know, it's still on the front page of the Mail. So, and Starmer has to operate in that space. So what he should do is not, you can't just say he should do better than David Davis.
I think what he should do is take no notice of a paper owned by someone who lives in Monaco.
Yeah.
But also, he will do what Keir Starmer said is country first, and we have got to get the best deal negotiated because, you know, the fishing industry has been thrown under the bus, and so is the farming industry by Brexit. I can't understand why these farmers turn up in London to protest against inheritance tax.
Well, but that's the point, though, isn't it? He has to deal. He has to deal with the world that we are living in, not the world that we feel we should be living in, and a world where farmers have been completely kebabbed by Brexit, but are also unhappy about inheritance tax. What does he say to them about negotiations with Brussels? This is the problem. Is I don't know what he should say. I don't know what he should do, because he can't promise anything. That's the nature of negotiations. And he can't pretend that he's got the power or that he's in charge, because he's not. And it's all very well saying ignore the media or ignore the newspapers, but the people who will pretend that this is a betrayal or will pretend that there was another path to follow, that they can damage his government. They can damage his...
There was an interesting one on Question Time. I don't know if you saw it, James, when Alistair Campbell was on the panel.
Yeah, go on.
And it was held in Lincolnshire, which was a Brexit.
Yes.
And when Alistair said it's been a con, the people were sort of, they were applauding him. And I think everybody knows now it has been a con. And what Keir should say is, look, we're going to gain a bit, we're going to lose a bit, but overall it will be for the best thing for this country, because we have got to realise now with trade. We are stuck in the middle. We need the EU, not America. And that's the danger, because the Americans are already pressurising us to take in more of their, what they would call high-quality meat.
I saw that at the weekend, and that's appalling news. Yet more bad news for British farmers. But how does he frame it? This is the key. This is the challenge, is that first of all, I don't know about that episode of Question Time. I've seen the numbers and the number of people that say that they regret their vote. I think Ali Mirage took a very powerful call this weekend from somebody who was making precisely that point. And I can see how easy it is to say, and I'll read you this. So basically, James, you're saying the Express and the Mail should dictate UK politics. Either Starmer stands up to them or he just capitulates. But that's not an answer to my question, because the question is, how should he stand up to them? You've got these voices. Boris Johnson would be among the loudest. Farage wouldn't be far behind, using language like treachery, betrayal, abandonment, surrender. Starmer is very much on the opposite side of that battlefield, but how does he articulate his position? That's the problem.
I think he articulates his position, James. He's got a stonking big majority, and he needs to use it, and he needs to say, overall, this will be a better deal for Britain, because, at the end of the day, Brexit... And I wish Keir and Rachel would hang Brexit round the riot master and Johnson's neck. It's been a disaster, but what he should say... I wish he'd come out and say it, James.
Yeah, but why doesn't he? Why doesn't he?
I don't know whether he thinks that.
Well, I think I do know today. This is why I talked about a penny drop moment earlier. Is that I think he's managing expectations. The more he comes out and hangs it around their necks or describes it accurately as being disastrous, the more the need for improvement becomes acute, and then the more pertinent it becomes that improvement's going to be really, really difficult. I think he's managing expectations. I didn't understand that before today.
Yeah, maybe he is. And, the thing is, the one thing about what I've read about Starmer is he is ruthless.
Well, he's supposed to be, isn't he? We saw that a bit with Sue Gray, I think.
Well, Sue Gray, you've seen it with Louise Haig. You've seen it, and I think he will be loose, but he does work to a plan.
So it's four and a half years out from an election. He goes to Brussels, he does the negotiations, he achieves something, and he comes back and sells it to the British people. And he completely ignores the noise made by the likes of the Daily Mail or Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage.
I think that's the way forward, James.
And then we have to move the question on to what it is he might realistically achieve. I mean, I don't know. Thank you, Alan. I don't know how you take the temperature of an entire population. The Question Time audiences, and I don't watch it as much as I probably should, but the Question Time audiences have been really interesting. They were skewed a certain way. According to how people had voted, often on Brexit or in the 2019 election. That created an absolutely insane environment on Thursday nights on the BBC because people so quickly realised they'd been sold a pup in 2019, 2 pups, Boris Johnson and Boris Johnson's Brexit, double pup. But I don't know. I don't know who responds. Does your dad still respond to it? Does your Uncle Bob? If they start talking about surrender and treachery and betrayal, will they get their strap back on their Brexit armour and go out there to defend nonsense against the reality of what Keir Starmer is charged with delivering or improving? I genuinely don't know, as I think I've proved beyond any reasonable doubt in the course of the last half an hour. Thank you, Alan. Nick's up next after the news. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. If you want to answer this question, what should Starmer do with regards to the EU? Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Gary makes a valid point. Please stop referring to it as British exceptionalism, James. It's without doubt English exceptionalism that you have. It's what's known as a crab mentality, cutting your nose off to spite your face. So please leave the other 3 nations out of it as we watch with sadness this slow motion car crash. It's like watching someone you love hurting themselves. I get that. I know I apologise, but I mean, it took us all out. And Wales voted for it as well, didn't they? Even if Scotland and Northern Ireland didn't. This is good from Nate. He says, Starmer should prepare the public, slowly showing us how Brexit is damaging us. Maybe get business to speak out more. The car industry, the fishing industry, the farmers. And then the headbangers will just be left to bang their heads against the wall. I wonder, yeah, okay, I quite like that. Archie Norman is a case in point, the head of Marks and Spencer's, who's spoken at length in the past about the damage that Brexit had done to his business and has revealed in the last couple of days that that Marks and Spencer's has been forced to open a warehouse to store Brexit paperwork. And this is what I mean. This is why I find it enduringly fascinating. People bought the idea that it would cut red tape and make life easier. It would make trade easier. And there is no more totemic name on the British High Street than Marks and Spencer. And they reveal that they have had their life made so much harder, they've had to open an entire warehouse to store red tape in. So what should Starmer be doing differently? I still can't see it. Jonathan's in Leicester. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I think Keir Starmer should have changed the track and the track that the Labour Party are currently following. And what I mean by that is in Parliament, every time they talk, they refer back to the past 14 years. And I mean, unless everyone's forgotten, the past 14 years does include Brexit.
Yeah. So
if Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are trying their hardest to show the country what they are doing, the best way to do it is to just bring up these situations and just say, look, we can't have another referendum. 51% or with 52%, whatever it was, they had their opinion. But at this point now, we all have to go back on what we have done and said.
Why do you think he isn't? Why do you think he isn't doing that? Because he has. I mean, the first couple of times I heard him say it, I was a bit disappointed. But that's the course that they have chosen. Is there's no earthly way we're ever going to undo this. They've ruled out restoring membership of the customs union and the single market. But none of that would necessarily stop him from going in a lot deeper on the damage that is being done and has been done. This story, like the Marks and Spencer story, could be something he could use to do what you describe. He could literally say, look, this is ridiculous. We've got to rescue British businesses from the mess that Boris Johnson has left them in. But he doesn't do it. He does it, as you say, with everything else that happened over the last 14 years. But he doesn't do it with this. Why not?
Because I think, given everything, again, that has happened in the past 14 years, this is the biggest stab in the heart to the people of this country. And what I mean by that is we've had decisions forced upon us by a number of conservative leaders.
Yeah.
But this is the decision that we took part in. And I feel as though he's wary that if he describes our decision as wrong, then
So he'd sound like me.
Or 99, we're all wrong.
He'd sound like me, and everyone would think he was calling them stupid.
Basically, that's the only way I could think, because it's clear for you and I, it's clear as daylight that we are in the position that we're in because of Brexit. I don't think the Conservatives would have lost. I'm a Labour fan. Sure. I don't think the Conservatives would have lost if, one, Brexit had worked, or two, there was no Brexit and the country was operating at a very different level. But because of Brexit, everything has to be viewed in a very different limelight. But I don't know if the country's ready to accept that. Well, I mean, we are. Most listeners are.
Well, that's the thing we can't. That's the thing we can't nail. It's why Alan mentioned the Question Time audience in Lincoln. But the Mail, they're betting the house on there being enough potential anger out there for it to still sell newspapers and damage the government. Starmer's surrender squad to undo Brexit. What we don't know, and the phone lines are open on this, but what we don't currently know is how many people feel their blood start boiling when they see that headline. How many people are directed to think that Keir Starmer is going to rob them of something that they can't currently describe. They can't tell you what it is that's going to be stolen any more than they could tell you 6 years ago what it was they were about to win. But tell them that it's going to be taken away and the emotional response would still be there. We just don't know, do we?
Yeah, but I feel like barring Labour stumping up the money to buy The Guardian, there is not going to be enough press that does force home the fact that there are more people that think otherwise than just the Daily Mail readers, SL.
No, and I think that's probably the most powerful element of my inbox this morning is the cowardliness of worrying about what the reaction might be from those corners of the media. I don't know if that's part of Starmer's calculation or motivation, but I mean, it looks as if it could be, doesn't it? As you say, that's all I can think of. What moves into the vacuum, the space created, is every theory is relevant. A friend of mine has been in touch to simply say he needs to grow a pair. That's not someone who's normally given to sort of simplistic analysis. He needs to grow a pair. He needs to say, this is really bad. My job is to undo some of the damage. This is how I'm going to do it. So why isn't he doing that? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Maggie says, I totally agree with one of your callers. Get all of the CBI powerhouses, the farmers, the fishing industry, talking about the Brexit negatives. But then, Maggie, the relative paucity of what might be achieved moves front and centre. So they've ruled out single market membership and customs union membership. What can they achieve? Answer, a veterinary agreement that would improve trade, but not to the point where it was before Johnson took us out of the European Union. And the leaked paper that the iNewspaper has got hold of formalises warnings that the UK would have to follow EU rules and submit to European Court of Justice oversight if he wants that sort of deal. And it goes further. So that's the problem. I don't know what he should do. And the more we talk about it, the more I wonder whether he does either. Thank you, Jonathan. Angus is in Karlsruhe in Germany. I almost certainly mispronounced that, Angus.
Oh, don't worry about it, James. So do I. And it's a privilege to talk to you.
Oh, don't be silly.
Yeah, my perspective is of an immigrant because of Brexit.
No. You're British, mate. You're an expat.
No, I'm an immigrant.
No, you can't be. There's no such thing as British immigrants. You're an expat.
Well, as a result of Brexit, my wife is German, and
right.
we lived together, married in Scotland for 10, 15 years, and then Brexit came along, and we didn't have to leave, but my wife was a social worker, was being treated so badly by many of the clients that she was working with.
So sorry to hear that.
So, yeah, and she had an elderly
we
mother.
voted to get rid of people like you.
Well, but since I've come here after Brexit, I have had to go through German courses. I've had to pass certain exams. I'm now here as a resident. And hopefully I can stay here and help care for my elderly mother-in-law. Now, before Brexit, this was not an issue. We could drive back and forward, we could fly back and forward. And the problem now is, of course, we're kind of, I'm an immigrant in Germany. But what I would like to say in terms of what I think Starmer should do, and indeed all the other political parties, with the possible exception of the Liberal Democrats. But even then, I'm not too sure. We need another referendum. We need another referendum to reset.
Oh Lord! Well, it would give him a mandate, and if he won it, it would give him mandate and freedom that is currently completely absent. But I don't think I could bet. Could you bet? It's all right for you sitting in Germany. I've got Anthony's been in touch. So the one thing he should categorically not do is ever have any referendum again, ever. And I've got some sympathy for that position. But in terms of, if we were to be completely pragmatic about it, if we could remove emotion from the equation entirely, the logical thing to do would be to get the kind of mandate for negotiations that he actually currently has in Parliament, that stonking majority.
Yeah. And the alternative, of course, is that next time we have a general election, we have some of the parties with enough bottle to actually say, we think Brexit was wrong, it was a daft idea, we might have gone along with it at the time, but we've now learned the error of our ways.
Why has he been so pussyfooted on that one, do you think? Is it red wall stuff? Is it people, I mean, rightly or wrongly, they think that red wall exodus in 2019 was a Brexity thing, and therefore he feels that many of those people may have lent him their vote in 2024?
I think the whole, well, as you know, having written a book about it, the whole situation was able to very cleverly weave issues around illegal immigration and boats and all that kind of thing with this idea that anyone that's in this country who's not born and bred British is not welcome or is part of the problem, and that, of course, was the whirlwind that people like your wife sowed, and I'm very sorry, reaped rather. I'm very sorry for her experiences. It's a bit shaming, isn't it? I remember one of the very first calls we took after the referendum result came in from a French psychiatrist who was moving back to France. She'd already decided because, just as Angus's social worker wife from Germany experienced, the people that she was actually working to help and look after were abusing them and using Brexit as a weapon. We voted to get rid of people like you, or we voted to send people like you home, being something that would actually be articulated. But we know that happened in the past. The question is what should happen in the future. And it's not clear. There's a strong sense that something must be done. But in terms of what he can realistically do, the only thing I think we could put money on would be to articulate a little bit more about the damage that has been done. Don't leave it to Goldman Sachs to publish their reports or Marks and Spencer's to reveal the red tape that they're drowning in. Actually start explaining it yourself. Start articulating it yourself as a grounds for the ongoing negotiations. And maybe call out the people that have been lying since the Brexit debate in this country began. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need, as ever, 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:47. I don't know. I mean, you can't just tell business what to do. Some of the car companies that are closing up shop or massively downgrading their capabilities wouldn't necessarily explain the part that Brexit has played in proceedings, because under the last government, they had to pretend that Brexit wasn't damaging their interests in order to stay sweet, to get sweeteners in some cases. So I find it odd to be having a conversation about Brexit where so much is unclear and confused, given that from 2016 until 2021, every single conversation we had about Brexit was crystal clear and completely unconfused. And respectfully to people who used to ring in to talk about 3-pin plugs and fish and chip wrappings, we, I use the word loosely, have been proved right about absolutely everything. But I've got no idea what Keir Starmer should be doing now. The snake oil salesmen are still out there. The betrayal narrative is still alive. Boris Johnson desperately trying all weekend to resurrect it. And those are factors that you have to take into account when answering the question or even addressing the issue of what he should do. And it's not clear what he should do, and it's not clear what he can do, which is why this is a very odd Brexit phone-in, for this programme at least. Susan's in Croydon. Susan, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Well, I think it actually makes sense what he's doing, because if you think about it, there are so many problems they have to fix with public services. Everybody feels poor. There's nobody can get a hospital appointment in a timely manner. Everything is creaking. And at the end, if you think about what his objective has to be at the end of his of their time in power, people on the street have to feel better off. Otherwise, if they don't feel better off in their everyday life, then you're going to have what happened in the U.S., where Trump gets elected on sort of this MAGA platform. So if he even starts looking at Brexit in this particular parliament, then he's just going to be giving oxygen to people like Reform, and they will eventually probably get in because the man on the street won't feel better off. And the thing is, Brexit, if he starts talking about it, it's going to consume so much energy to try and do it. He's going to be batting that. You won't be able to do the other stuff. Now, there's a catch-22.
Yes.
If you were to actually reverse Brexit, chances are you'd have more money to fix the public services and people would feel better off.
There's no chances about it, but that's
no,
not
it will
the point, is it?
It's true, but it won't happen in 5 years.
No,
so what will happen is all of the brouhaha about Brexit and the oxygen for Farage, etc., will be there. They will get in, and none of the benefits will actually come through. So better to focus his first parliament on making people feel better off, and hopefully, fingers crossed, they actually are able to do it with the limited funds that they have, so they get in again, and that's when they talk about it. And during that time, stories like Marks and Spencer's and their warehouse of red tape, etc., could be building.
And he can. It's a very strong view, actually, and it has the benefit of fitting almost all of the available facts, and a little bit of tinkering in the meantime, which will prompt a hysterical response from the likes of the Mail or Johnson. That's just an occupational hazard, but he can't do any more than what he's trying to do for two reasons. Number one, as you say, there's only so many battles you can fight. There's only so many fronts that you can fight on at the same time, and number two, the achievable rewards are relatively small, so he can't overpromise. Why do you think? And there's one flaw in the parallel with America, and one flaw only. And it's contained within the question I'm about to ask you. Why do you think the people who sold the country Brexit and who delivered Brexit have thus far managed to avoid any observable responsibility for its reality? It's whether you're talking about Farage or Johnson, why have the key salesmen? And don't forget that Farage greased Boris Johnson's passage into Downing Street back in 2019 and described Liz Truss's fiscal calamity as the best budget he'd seen in 50 years. So how do these people manage to carry no can whatsoever for the reality of things like the Marks and Spencer story and the hit to GDP?
I think it's because of the acceptance of quote-unquote alternative facts.
Yeah.
And I think that in the last 10, 15 years, there's been that narrative peddled that you can't trust the mainstream media. There's all, the proliferation of social media. You've got all of these lies that are out there.
So people can choose to believe that Brexit is going really well and just shut that, or that it could have gone much better if only ... or there is a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school. And the emotional relief you get from not having to take responsibility for being completely mugged in 2016 makes you double down on the alternative.
There's actually a psychological theory for that called cognitive dissonance. I studied psych when I was at university.
No, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So what that basically means is that if you take a stance on something, even a small one, then even when the facts come later on to disprove that, you're going to double down on it. Because otherwise it means that you're wrong. And some people can't do it, become that cognitive dissonance. I'm a smart person. I can't have made such a stupid mistake. Therefore, I will cling to every scrap that tells me what I want to know.
Protect my self-regard. And then the element missing, or rather to marry your analysis to something that has come previously, it's very, very hard to address that without telling these people that they're stupid, or without saying things that make them think that
you're stupid, just misled. Because the thing is, the other bit I was going to say,
no, but when he starts,
even the mainstream media has been peddling the lies.
Well, that's very true.
Do you see what I mean? So if you hear that, the Daily Mail, so these reputable, so it's not just social media, right?
No.
It's the reputable, because 80% of I can't remember the figure of British media is controlled by people with that kind of an agenda.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're reading it from so you actually think. So I'm not saying people are stupid. I'm just saying they've been misled.
Yeah, but the people that you're up against will say that they're calling you stupid, and so Starmer has to avoid that a bit as well. I mean, I've tried the misled thing. I'll tell you what, Susan, I think people think you should probably be doing my holiday cover. This caller is so good, James. This caller is brilliant. Ian says this caller has nailed it. Time to move on to another topic. She's closed this one down. It's I hope you take these compliments in the spirit that they're intended. Time for a different topic. This caller has nailed it. Thank you for that, Susan. It's a beautiful marriage of some of the thoughts that had already been expressed to some that hadn't, and the biggest defence yet of the policies or the approach that he's adopting. You can't fight on every front. You'll be depleted. His priorities are measurable improvement in people's lives. The catch-22 is, yes, this would help with that, but it would come at a cost that at the moment in the first term he can't afford to pay. Fergus is in Dublin. Fergus, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I'm on a slightly different tack
than
the last speaker, which I think you're right. She is brilliant. My view on it is that, like, England has gone through what is basically a family divorce.
Yes.
It's a bit like I have a son who is separated recently, and the agony that we've all gone through, the fear of talking about it, the fear of the problems. I think that's exactly what you're going through.
Gosh.
And what Starmer needs to do is have a conversation, no matter how hard, how tough. You've been out now since the mid-teens.
Yes.
And I think time enough has passed for you to be able to have it. If you can't have an adult conversation and get it out there, then you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to live in this limbo of,
but see, I wonder whether
what should I say? What shouldn't I?
You have the benefit of distance. You're like a concerned relative. You're not actually part of the divorce. Those of us in the midst of the divorce possibly don't feel ready yet to have the conversation, which is the point.
And you can't see the wood for the trees.
No, that's
and
also
you're
true.
still going over the old arguments that you had before the divorce. You're fighting with each other. You're completely the amount of discord and all within Britain. And then on top of that, you don't even know at this point how many people are actually totally against the EU anymore or towards some sort of agreement because you're afraid to talk about it. You've said it. You said at the beginning there when you were talking to someone, oh my God, do we really want to go through a referendum again? Somebody said never in history. Look, we've had referenda in this country over divorce, over contraception, over various issues. The pain, the suffering. I was much younger then and I was very involved in politics, and a friend of mine was working for RTE at the time. We went to one of the local churches. Well, what was going on? And, you know, if you were pro-divorce at that time, which would be a bit like wanting to stay in the EU, it was painful. And we lost, but we had to go back to it. We had to face it when people realised what. And the lies that were told then are like the lies now about fishing, about this, about that. You know, we were told that, the woman would run off with the family farm the minute divorce was introduced. She'd get divorced and take the farm.
The problem with that, I love an analogy. I love an analogy, as you know, Fergus. But with a divorce, there's two parties. Both have claims. Both can say they were right. Both have something in need of protection. This isn't a divorce in the conventional sense because one side is wrong. It's not wrong. One side is wronged and the other side is wrong. And so, I mean, it adds to the idea that the conversation needs to be had, but I don't know. I think Marv probably touches on something missing from your analysis. He writes, not to sound condescending, but right-thinking people who were duped into voting to leave the EU have seen the impact and are willing to change their stance and their minds. But there's a portion of the population that flatly refuses to change their mind, refuses to accept they were mugged off, refuses to accept responsibility for what they have done because there would be too much loss of face. So now losing face is one thing, but those same people had hope when they voted. That's the really sad part, because the hope was given by a bunch of charlatans, spivs and liars. Those people are hard to reach because losing hope is more difficult to accept than losing face. You will never convince those people that Brexit was a foolish thing to do because their ego and their ignorance will never allow it. Brexit is a failure, and anyone who cannot see this is a fool or complicit, which means Starmer has to either call people foolish or complicit or continue down the path that he's going down. That was my bit at the end, added on to Marv from Brentwood's contribution. Fergus, thank you. Back to Britain. Jill's in Peterborough. Jill, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Lovely
Jill.
to talk to you.
Likewise.
I've thought for a long time, we've had a lot of mis-selling scandals in this country over the years, mostly financial.
Yes.
And I've thought for a long time that Brexit's been the biggest one.
Oh, that's good.
That, the people,
we should have adverts on LBC. Ring this number now to reclaim your Brexit compensation. I like it.
Yeah, well, all of the people I know who voted for Brexit either deeply and openly regret it or never mention it.
Yes.
And I think if they had a victim label, if they were the victims, that might help.
Victims of mis-selling. So
victims of mis-selling.
Duped.
Yes.
I mean, Marv's point about hope notwithstanding, I wonder what the numbers are. And Starmer saying, listen, it's not your fault. Lots of perfectly intelligent people fell for it, but now we know what it really looks like. It's time to start rolling our sleeves up and getting on with the business of undoing some of the damage. Would it work?
Well, it's worth a try.
It's got to be better than the current pursuit, the current path.
Worth a try to change the narrative.
Yes, and you know, these mad hysterical front pages and attention-seeking diatribes from the likes of Boris Johnson, be damned, forget them. At some point, you're going to have to ignore them or overcome them or just destroy them. And for me, sooner probably rather than later, but the caution with which he's approaching it makes a hell of a lot more sense at 11 o'clock this morning than it did at 10 o'clock this morning or yesterday or last year. So we will watch the negotiations. We'll do what we've always done on Brexit, and we'll give you the facts. We'll explain what's going on with regards to the veterinary agreement, with regards to mobility, with regards to the UK-EU Security Pact, and we'll occasionally cast an eye over what the right-wing media is doing and marvel at the madness, the mayhem, the hysteria and the outright lies. And we'll do it with a wary eye because we know that they work.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, the final piece of the jigsaw, perhaps, that little reminder. Something we discovered in the years after 2016, that a person will hate the person who points out they've been mugged more than they actually hate the mugger. And that is another part of the challenge that Keir Starmer faces. A complete change of pace now. And in fact, the polar opposite in terms of what I have to construct now before opening up the phone lines for you. So that was an entirely speculative, theoretical and notional conversation because none of us know what is in the future. All of the previous conversations we've had about Brexit have been marked by many of us knowing exactly what would be in the future. And now we're there. The only real mystery that remains is why all the people who lied to you and to us, why all the people who lied to us remain more or less unscathed and untouched by the consequences of their lies. And that, I'm afraid, is quite Trumpian, isn't it? But the next conversation is something that will be rooted entirely in evidence and experience. And I am not qualified to contribute either evidence or experience. I can simply relay to you what you just heard in your news bulletin about so-called corridor care in crowded wards. But before I do that, I have a little missing word round for you. I'm not going to give you any clues at all. I think quite a few people will have spotted this. I know that because one or two have already asked me to comment on it, but I can't do that if I'm going to use it as a grounds for a missing word round. Are you ready for today's missing word round, or the first missing word round of the week? Are you ready? Perfect weather conditions present a crop of supersized blank. Perfect weather conditions present a crop of supersized blank. If you need a clue on that, I would say it's a subject upon which I could happily hold forth for the best part of an hour. That's all I'm going to say. Perfect weather conditions present a crop of supersized what? Don't forget, you can text me, you can WhatsApp me, or you can message me on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I currently, and I suspect for the foreseeable future, will continue to favour. Mr. James O.B. is my handle over there. In fact, there is a groundswell of consensus over on Blue Sky. Jackie, David, and others, Jay, all saying, please never say the words Farage greased Johnson's passage ever again. Just don't. The thing is, though, if I know it's getting that reaction, it's one of those things I can do to sort of, make your ears prick up. So I can't make you that promise, I'm afraid. It is not bollards. It is not supersized bollards, which may qualify as a bit of an in-joke, but I liked it. So the NHS is under fire for suggesting corridor care in crowded hospitals can be delivered safely. I mean, it's one of those stories that makes you go, what? But then as soon as you go, what, you have to go, why, don't you? And if you go, why, you sort of go, well, they're dealing with the actual reality of what A&E is like these days. No one's pretending it's good or acceptable or should be considered as standard. But given that it is something that we currently have to live with, should we have a look at how dangerous or safe it is? And if we have a look at how dangerous or safe it is, then only then can we start advising on how to cope better with this supremely undesirable scenario. Am I sounding, I don't think that sounds desperate. So you're living in circumstances, I'm trying to think what the radio equivalent would be. You're doing your show from a shed, for example. When I was doing my show from the shed, nobody wanted me to be doing the show from a shed. But only after we'd started doing it could you have conversations about how things might be improved. Should we get an ISDN line? Should I ask the neighbours to stop jumping up and down on their trampoline because the squeaking was being picked up by the microphones and people thought there was something wrong with their radios? The bird song was rather beautiful, actually, I found. That was actually an added, attempted to bring some birds into the studio. But you see what I mean? You've got a suboptimal scenario, and trying to improve that suboptimal scenario is not surrender, is it? At least I don't think it is. So we're having to deal with this. Therefore, we'll look into it and come up with some ideas on how safe it is and how we might improve it. But that, I'm afraid, doesn't butter many parsnips when you just find yourself addressing the sheer horror of so-called corridor care. And that's what I want to do. So you've got a bit of tension between doctors and their employer. The NHS has suggested that corridor care can be delivered safely. Now, we should want to hear that, if you see what I mean. You should want to hear that. If you're visiting a loved one in hospital today and they are in a corridor rather than on a ward, there should be some relief attached to the claim that they are actually going to be safe in corridors, until you find out that the leading A&E doctors are criticising the guidance and describing it as normalising the dangerous. So there's two phone-ins here. There's two conversations for us to have. There's the classic, the all-time classic, what was it like? But then there is also the question of who's right. I don't know who's qualified to answer the second question. An A&E doctor can say to me, listen, it's not perfect, and I'd much rather there weren't people on corridors. Nurses can, but it's the least bad available option at the moment. Do you see what I mean? Who can tell us? The NHS say it's fine, the doctors say it isn't. But you know it's not perfect, but how imperfect is it? I think we'll begin with the first question. A, because it's a heck of a lot easier to answer, and B, because there'll be people listening who can answer it. And I want patients' families and friends, and I want medical professionals to answer this. And I don't want any particularly complicated analysis. I just want a simple explanation with a side order of description of what it is like. How common is it to have patients in corridors or even in cupboards? I've not encountered it myself. I think I've walked past it on the way to the treatment room that we were heading towards, and you see someone in a corridor, but you don't know if they're there permanently because you're not there for long enough to actually arrive at a conclusion. What is it like to be admitted to hospital and to realise after a couple of hours that the corridor is actually your permanent home? It's not a position of transit. What was it like when your mum was in, or your granddad, and you went to visit them and you found that they were not on a proper ward in any conventional sense? How long were they in the corridor for? How bad is it? 0345 60600973. And from a medical point of view, I always remember when we talk about medical matters, when we were talking about sepsis, I've told you this a few times, when we were talking about sepsis, and I got a message from a lady who had an operation the following week, and I had managed, in the course of the conversation I was conducting, to make her even more nervous and frightened about her imminent hospital appointment than she was already. And I felt rotten about that. I felt really, really rotten, because that was the last thing that I wanted to do. But equally, it would be completely remiss on a platform such as this one not to have a conversation about something as serious and as significant as sepsis. And I've never squared that circle. I don't know how you do it. You have to report the news. And if sepsis is big news and sepsis kills, you need to know about it. You need to keep track of it. You need to know where it is and what it's doing. But equally, you don't want people who need to go to hospital to either think that perhaps they won't, or to approach hospital in even higher states of anxiety and stress than they would have done otherwise. I don't know how you do it. But this is that memory came to mind when I was reading this story today, because I want there to be a positive here. It is as if we're making the best of a bad lot, but making the best of a bad lot is a good thing to do. The best thing to do is to get rid of the bad lot and replace it with a good lot. So obviously, no one disputes the fact that treating patients in corridors is suboptimal. It is not perfect. It is not ideal. It is not good. But if it is necessary, if the current situation demands that patients are treated in corridors, then a conversation about whether or not it is as bad as it initially sounds and as bad as it initially appears is an important conversation to have. Use of corridors will lead to long waits in emergency departments, which doctors say is associated with measurable harm to patients. So the longer you're hanging around in a corridor, the more exposed you might be to other problems. But I don't know why necessarily, given that you're going to spend some time in them anyway. 96,661 beds filled each day at the moment. This is in last week. What percentage of the total available beds do you think that we reached last week? Do you want to have a guess? What percentage? So of all the beds, it's around about, not far off 100,000 beds, but what percentage of 94.6%? Health service leaders have been told to prioritise patient safety because you've got that winter whammy on the way, reading about a four-pronged possible assault on the health services. So the reality of corridors and cupboards being deployed for storing patients, for want of a better word, is, I'm afraid, unavoidable. I don't know how bad it is, and I wonder whether the NHS is actually doing a good thing. Even though it's under fire today, it's doing a good thing by trying to address and even calm some of the concerns that you would have, that people will have when they find out that they or their loved one is being treated in a corridor. So what's it like? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I want to stress that I know it's imperfect, but the job of the health service is to battle through the imperfection, to cope. There's a good word. Can't believe it took me 14 minutes to get there. But they have to cope. However bad it is, they have to cope. So how helpful is it for them to be told that actually this is okay? It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but they have to cope. And if you're in the business of coping, then you tell me what you think about corridor care, as it's called. 0345 6060 973. That's the tension. The people charged with the coping are reading stories today from their bosses saying that you can deliver safely. You can deliver corridor care safely. I want that to be true, even as at the same time, I don't want corridor care to exist. Do you see what I mean? So let's try and get both of those covered. What is it like? How bad is it? 0345 6060 973. And how do you arrive at your answer to the question of whether or not it can actually be done safely? It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:16 is the time, and it has to happen. And against the backdrop of knowing that it has to happen, what is it like and how bad is it? We're talking about corridor care in crowded wards, an agreeable alliteration, but not, I imagine, an agreeable experience. Stephen's in Carshalton. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm actually in St Helier Hospital at the moment in the supposed to be rapid response unit.
Okay.
There's people everywhere in corridors, people walking out with cannulas in their arms because they're not being treated. I went myself last night because, to be blunt, I'm an alcoholic and they wouldn't give me a drink. So I buggered off home to get a drink to calm myself down.
Well, that's not ideal, but you don't need me to tell you that. What are you there for?
I had a heart attack yesterday morning. And they've got I had a heart attack 2 years ago, but I was in the same situation. I got here, they told me it was a 6-hour wait, so I walked out. And they've got no record of the first heart attack So they're treating this as the first event. I mean, I know it's not, because the pains last time were a lot worse.
Right. So they've triaged you.
Basically, all they've done is I've had about 5 ECGs. I waited 16 hours before they put me on a acute bed to monitor me overnight.
And where's the bed? Are you on a ward now?
No, I'm in the acute reception. It's like the rapid response unit, but 16 hours, no rapidness in that.
But you're in a bed?
I'm sitting on a bed with no sheet on it.
Okay. Good Lord. Did you know what to expect when you got there? I mean, given that it happened 2 years ago.
I sort of had it in mind. I mean, this is the first time I've spent an overnight in hospital since I was born.
Right.
So I wasn't looking forward to the experience. Now I've been told that they can't get me an angiogram for 3 days. Because
of queues, presumably? Because there's some...
I don't know, to be honest, James, because I think they're talking about transferring me to St George's. Whether they've actually got the machine here or not, I don't know.
Oh, I see. Oh, mate, I'm sorry that you're going through this. I really am. What? I mean, and it's a bit difficult for you to answer the next question, I imagine. But I mean, looking around, we've got the problem that we've got in all our public services at the moment, which is that there are more people who need space than there are spaces. What can you see? I mean, if someone comes in gushing blood from the head, presumably they're not going to be sat down next to you for 6 hours.
Well, I don't think they come into the bit that I'm in. This is like more sort of, I haven't seen anyone with any.
But it's not a ward. Like it's not a ward. No, it's a part of the processing.
Yeah, so you go into you go into the main A&E. There's a set of double doors. You go through. There's a corridor that's completely rammed with trolleys and blood pressure monitors and stuff.
Yeah.
Turn the corner into another corridor. Same thing again. I mean, a brief story that broke my heart. I've got 6 grandchildren. I'm 63 years of age. There was a young girl come in yesterday in her 20s.
Yeah.
Asian-looking girl. Obviously been raped. 2 police officers turned up, spent about an hour with her. A nurse come in, poked her head in, and they basically drew the curtain around her and left her in the corner on her own all day.
God.
I did report it to the registrar who come to see me. He said, "Oh, well, I'll look into it."
Sure.
But I met a couple of guys. Guys are walking out of here with cannulas in their arms because they just can't stand it.
What do you say to the claim today that it's possible to treat you safely, albeit you've described absolutely hideous circumstances? What about the idea that the suggestion today that in a hospital as crowded as the one that you find yourself in, healthcare can still be delivered safely? I mean, the fact that these people have got cannulas in their arms, odd though it sounds and unbearable though these waits are, is better than a system in which they haven't. But that word safely, how does that reach your ears this morning, Stephen?
It's ridiculous.
I thought that
cannot be done.
No.
Cannot be done. I mean, look, they know I've had a heart attack. They know I went home last night and grabbed some beers. They know I'm now sitting outside in the car park smoking, talking to you.
Right.
No one's pulled me.
None of which is... Well, I mean, I know it's hard with addiction, but it's not their responsibility to stop you doing the things that are harming yourself. Only you can do that. But the treatment in the meanwhile obviously should be coming quicker. Can I ask you a silly question?
Go on then.
Are you sure? Are you sure you should be listening to me if you're in this condition health-wise? You know how this program. You know how this program kicks off sometimes, Stephen. The last thing I want to do is add to your burdens.
No, I was hoping Farage would be there and have a go at him and all.
I wish you well. You know that I do. And crikey, that is straight from the coal face, as it were. Speaking of Mr. Farage, the woman who threw a milkshake over him during his election campaign has been spared an immediate jail term. You'll remember that he was covered in the drink after the cup was thrown at him as he left a pub in Clacton on the 4th of June. The assailant, who is an OnlyFans model, Victoria Thomas Bowen, admitted the offence and criminal damage at Westminster Magistrates Court in October, but has not been sent to jail. She pleaded guilty to causing £17.50 worth of damage to a jacket belonging to Mr. Farage's security officer. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. It is Tricia in Liverpool next. Tricia, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. Hi.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. It was what you're saying about the hospital corridors being full. So it's not a normal thing, but I've noticed as we come into winter, the hospital corridors are getting full. I would say that the only problem with that, obviously, it's not ideal, but the patient's care, patient's dignity would be compromised because sometimes you can see over the shutters when you're going up the stairs, but that can't be helped. I'd say the main reason that they are in the corridors is because, for example, on my ward, I'm a therapist and I work on a respiratory ward. So a lot of our patients are what you call medically optimised. When they're ready to go, they're known as medically optimised. We can have no more medical intervention that would make them better. It's normally the social side of things that are keeping them there, such as awaiting a nursing home or a package of care. So we will put in that package of care, but it normally gets rejected for the most silly things, some silly little number that would be left out. So therefore, when we have to fill that in again, and that's normally the job of the discharge nurse to fill in, by the time the package of care comes back, the patient has got what's called a HAP, which is a hospital-acquired pneumonia. So I would say... back
in again.
So, well, they don't even get discharged. They stay there. Like, I had one patient, he had mould in his flat. So we couldn't discharge him because it wouldn't have been a safe discharge. So we had to get in touch with the council, which literally took 3.5 weeks.
And all that time he's in a hospital bed that he doesn't technically need or medically need.
He didn't medically need the bed.
This is the story I hear so often. In fact, Jen's been in touch. I know Jennifer. She kindly sent me some cheese last week, would you believe, Tricia, as an early Christmas present. But she's had 7 strokes in the last few months. She's had a terrible time of it. She's in and out of hospital all the time. And she tells me, and has told me before, that it's the failures in adult social care that mean all but one bed last time she was in was taken by an elderly patient who wasn't medically in need to be there. The social care sector is totally broken and these people get stuck in hospital. So they're in beds. The newly arrived patients are in corridors and cupboards. Yeah. And there's an arithmetic, a mathematical logic to what we describe, and the only real solution to it is easing the logjam by getting people into social care or home.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know people do complain, James, about people being in corridors, but for a situation like my mum was in a corridor for 3 days now, I wasn't angry at that. I was just grateful that he managed to fit her somewhere because she's getting the care.
I'm glad you're listening today. That's what I was trying to convey in my interminable introduction. That's nobody thinks this is good. But for goodness sake, I mean, what's it like for doctors and nurses? Do you think they signed up for this? They think they left medical school or they left college thinking, oh, I hope I work in a hospital that's so full we've got people in corridors on trolleys. It just wouldn't happen.
It's only through dedication that we're like that, James, because we've got this nurture, we've got this empathy, and people who are basically saying it's so wrong. Well, would you rather us turn you away sick, or would you rather be, a couple of days in a corridor and then moved on to a ward? It's absolutely not the medical professional's fault. No. As once again, it's the government.
And yet you could hear with the last fellow, who was a nice bloke, albeit that he's not, as he won't mind me saying, Stephen, he's not making his own situation any easier. You can see how frustration would bubble up with people that are in front of you. If you're dealing with an unconscionable delay, you're not going to blame it on Jeremy Hunt, are you, or the 14 years of austerity? You're going to blame it on the people that are sitting in front of you. Tricia, thank you. I needed that call. Ian picks up the point I just made. Can you please make it clear that the corridor care is an inherited mess that Wes Streeting is picking up after years of ideological downsizing in the NHS by Jeremy Hunt and others? It's not just winter. Last July, I had to go to the new Royal Liverpool, that's up in Tricia's part of the world, with an elderly uncle after he had a fall at home, and the situation was pretty dire. Claire says, I'm having chemotherapy. I've been to A&E 4 times in the last 6 weeks. I was sent there by my chemo team. There's nowhere safe to sit, despite being very heavily immunocompromised. I've been left in a corridor for over 3 hours, surrounded by sick people. I was sent home with a blood clot that was not assessed. My team sent me to different A&E hospital who acted quickly and gave me the anticoagulants which I needed. That's from Claire, who's in Berkshire. And I mean, there it is. That claim that it's safe might be true for a lot of people, as Tricia highlights. And indeed, it's better than not getting any treatment at all. But there will be some people for whom it is absolutely unbearable. And it's the social care. It's the usually elderly people who can't leave hospital even though they don't medically need to be there anymore. Not that will stop someone somewhere. I haven't seen it in my inbox yet. But start the countdown for someone to blame it all on immigration. Giles is in Carnarvon. Giles, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm a coronary care nurse of 30 years' experience.
Gosh.
And it's all messed up.
Yes.
And I think the problem is that primary care in the community, has not been funded or invested in at all.
Yeah.
All of my career. When I was training as a nurse, they said, all you nurses, you're going to be working in the community, not in hospitals.
Okay.
You're going to be looking at them in the community. And it hasn't happened. And I've got people downstairs in A&E that are obviously having chest pain. And my coronary care unit is full of people that don't need to be there. And they're poorly chaps, lots of comorbidities. You know,
I'm losing the phone line a bit. Which is annoying because you're really making a powerful contribution. So the coronary care unit would be the beds. I think we're trying to improve Giles's line, and we'll go back to him ideally after the very latest news headlines. Because as I glance upwards, so engrossed am I with the calls. Extraordinary, 2 out of 3 so far have come actually from hospitals. One on the staff side of things, and one poor fella in the car park waiting to be seen over what he is certain and is a heart attack. It's just gone 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 32 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A couple of messages, because some people don't want to be recognised in the context of their work. Anonymous, please. Remember, always put that at the top of the message, otherwise I'll get to the bottom of it and I'll notice. I'm a senior clinical nurse, 37 years in the NHS. The reason for looking after in corridors are as follows. Number of beds available has been cut over the last 15 years. There's no proper social care to discharge people into. There's no adequate access to GPs for non-urgent care. The non-clinical management don't have a clue and don't care about the actual pressure on clinical staff are under when caring for patients, and it's them pushing to get people discharged without any understanding that we are being crushed under the weight of layers of non-clinical management who have no clue but are happy to take the money. Paul's in Birmingham. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Firstly, I think that message says it all, really. I'm a nurse. I work in the West Midlands, and I used to work in accidents and emergency.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to take away from the stories that the patients are telling you, because that's the most important thing. So I don't want to take too much time, but there are a few things I'd just like to point out. In case anybody wasn't aware, the bed isn't the thing with a mattress on it. The bed is the space with all of the equipment and the staffing and all of that kind of stuff. So just creating somewhere to lie doesn't actually create a bed. When we've looked at risk assessments for corridor care in the past, they are associated with increased harm. I think the emergency doctors have already said that and published the data. If you go to a corridor bed space, there is no piped oxygen, so you're relying on bottled oxygen. Yeah. Bottles run out, and especially run out when people aren't there to monitor them. And if you're on a particular kind of mask with a bag attached, that's actually more dangerous than not having the mask on when the oxygen goes flat. Yeah. There's no suction. There's no suction on the wall. The portable suction, you're relying on something with a battery that lasts you about 20 minutes, and that's got to last half the department. So if somebody needs support for an airway problem, you've got really, really limited equipment. The dignity thing. So people mention dignity. That is actually a safety thing. If someone's dying for the loo, and if you've got someone of a certain generation that's got, proud independence, if there's no one around, they will try and walk themselves to a bathroom, and that can be incredibly dangerous, especially if the rails are up, This cannot be safe. There's no way this can be safe. There's no more staff. When you bring
Here's the thing. Sorry, I feel like I'm cutting you off, but that's an incredible litany of shame, really, albeit that the responsibility for it lies not with, and a couple of people who work in the on the management side of things are very unhappy with that message that I just read out from the anonymous nurse. I'm happy to register that as well. I'll give you one quick example. I'm a non-clinical manager in a hospital. I'm completely aware of all the stresses on our clinical staff. That was a ridiculous comment that your texter just made. Here's my problem, Paul, and I don't mean to sound silly, but someone listening to this whose mum is currently in a corridor, we have a responsibility to report the reality of what is happening, but at the same time, you didn't go into healthcare to make people like that feel worse than they do already. So it's really tricky, isn't it, to get the balance right?
Now, the only thing patients can do in that situation, and it's horrible to say, but the only thing they can do is advocate for themselves and the people around them. Yeah. If you've got someone in the next bay in the corridor, then call for help and keep calling until they get it. Look, there are human beings in healthcare, doctors, nurses, everyone else, we're doing our best. But if I'm honest, when you've been in this environment for so long, you start to miss things. You don't hear things that would have shocked you 10 years ago,
I can believe it.
And
I took
a relative and a patient just saying, look me in the eyes,
wow.
That will bring them back to humanity. The staff are trying their best.
Thank you for reminding us of that. And what you say about normalisation is fascinating, because we spoke to the aunt of a doctor a couple of Christmases ago about how bad things are, and she pointed out he hadn't been there long enough to know what it was like before. So for him, the stuff that you, with your time on the clock, would be stunned by, for younger members of staff, that's all they've ever known now. Good
cares and memory. Just one thing, because I know you've got to get to another call. Please, I hope if anyone non-clinical is listening, the managers, when I said the previous caller said it all, I'll retract that bit. That's not fair. The non-clinical managers work with human beings too, and they're trying their level best. Yeah. It's not that they don't care. They've just got limited resources. My only concern is we say it's safe when it's not.
That's why we're having this conversation today. So the Royal College of Emergency Medicine is adamant that you cannot provide safe and good quality care in corridors or cupboards. And the more I listen to people like you, the more persuaded I am that they're right. Before you go, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, for sure.
Any updates on those 40 new hospitals in your part of the world yet, Paul?
Technically, we had one, but they just upgraded one of the buildings. So apparently the whole hospital's new now.
A lick of paint equals a new hospital. They probably claim they opened a new asylum processing centre for unaccompanied children in Dover after Honest Bob Jenrick ordered them to paint over the murals there. I think under Johnson's definition of a new hospital, that would almost count as a new asylum centre. Thank you, Paul. Back to Giles, who's in Carnarvon. I was struck by what you were saying about coronary care units that containing people who didn't medically need to be there. How does that happen, Giles?
Well, they've got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So people have got to be shifted outside of A&E within a certain amount of time.
Yes.
A little red button goes off in South Wales, in Carnarvon, in Cardiff,
yes,
that says people have breached. So we're getting pushed people that don't need to be where we are. We've only got 6 beds in North Wales.
Wow.
And I know there are people having heart attacks downstairs in ED, or having.
And what can you do? What can you do for them or with them?
Well, I don't know what I can do.
Oh.
And I've got the acute admissions ward along from us, with young nurses trying their bloody best.
Of course.
In tears sometimes when they're tracking down the corridor and being shouted at, and everybody's having an awful time. And as I said before, we were promised that money would be put into primary care. And that's where it should be. Everybody needs looking after.
And that's it. I mean, there's no...
Quite horrible.
Yeah.
A 94-year-old with COPD, heart failure, AF, and pneumonia doesn't need to be on coronary care.
No, I hear you.
They need to be looked after somewhere. Of course they do.
But there's nowhere. And until that is fixed, then we're going to be having this conversation again and again and again. And what doesn't...
forever and ever and ever.
What doesn't help, and I'll just get your quick opinion on this, is for NHS England to produce guidance talking about safe and good quality care in temporary escalation spaces.
Well, there's that. I mean, Tony Blair had intermediate care, places in the community where people were looked after with chronic illness outside of the acute setting. he did that well. And that all went away. Under whose government? Well, yeah. I don't need to say, do I?
No, you don't need to say, and it's important to remember. I get the odd message wondering how long the current government can blame the messes that they are seeking to address on the previous government, and the answer is probably forever if you've got the detail and the evidence to back it up. So cottages and convalescent care, intermediary care, stuff was just shut down, and what they thought would happen next, I do not know. But that very simple equation, save money today and pass it off as progress, tax cuts, whatever it is, costs you a fortune tomorrow. Spend some money today, saves you a fortune tomorrow. Hugely simplistic, I grant you, but it also, I think, has the stamp of credibility. Thank you, Giles. Vic's embarking. Vic, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James. Long time no speak. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Well, it was. I got triggered by the corridor thing because I've been recently through it myself with my old mum. She was an elderly lady and she fell over and she got a hematoma. She was discharged, but she was getting dizzy spells, so I took her back inside the hospital.
Right.
After she was triaged, she was put in literally in a corridor, and there wasn't any beds. So this thing about beds is, like somebody has already said, about it's a space, and it was literally like an armchair that could recline. And she was there for 4 days, whilst they did scans on her, did X-rays on her, and
4 days in a chair.
In a chair.
Oh my!
I'm not even joking.
No, I know you're not. I've read similar experiences, and had what?
And
go on.
And the whole corridor was chairs. It was about 14 or 15 chairs in a row, lined up against a wall, literally in a corridor. So the thing about NHS England saying they can deliver it safely, I don't know what more the doctors and nurses can do, because they are trying. I'm sure they don't go out deliberately to make it unsafe.
Well, I think one point we're also missing is that all of these things will contribute to people leaving the profession or changing their jobs and moving away from the areas that are most exposed to the stresses you described. What? And I know this is not going to be medical or clinical, but what impact do you think that element of the experience had on your mum? The fact that
it would just so it puts her off, because she's elderly, and you think to yourself, look, I tend to panic if anything's wrong with her, and if I can't get a doctor's appointment, I'll say to her, look, if you're really ill, I'm going to take you down to the hospital.
Yes, of course.
And she'll go, no, I'm fine.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with me. I don't want to go. So she feels guilty about taking up space in the hospital.
Yeah.
So it's not the nurses' fault. It's not the NHS's fault. But for them to say, "Oh, we can do it safely," well, what do you think they're trying to do already?
I mean that's why I used the point about the lady who listened to a phone-in on sepsis 10, 15 years ago and just came away from the programme feeling worse than she did at the beginning. But I suppose sometimes you either talk about stuff honestly or you don't talk about it at all in the hope of not upsetting people, or triggering was the word you used. And I don't think we can do that, not when it comes to the NHS, a shared resource, a shared treasured resource like the NHS. Vic, take care. Elaine has been in touch. So I was a clinical senior manager when I retired in 2012. I can confirm that corridor care was not a thing until 2010. It was a threat that clinical staff would make in order to get an avalanche of people focused on it not happening. This is how 14 years of Tory government has normalised the system. A corridor can never be safe for patients nor staff. I wonder if that's how it happens as well. So I felt that impulse. I make no apology for that impulse I felt at the beginning of this hour to want it to be true, because if you're Vic and you've just dropped your mum off at a hospital and you can't stay with her, you want to believe that the deeply suboptimal circumstances in which you have been compelled to leave her may not be as bad as they initially appear. There's nothing, that is a normal human feeling. I hope things aren't as bad as they look. So when NHS England come out and say in terms things aren't as bad as they look, you want it to be true, which is why it's with a heavy heart. And there's still 15 minutes left for you to challenge this conclusion, but I don't think it is, especially when you read the Royal College of Emergency Medicine describing the guidance as nonsensical and out of touch. I mean, just in our bones we feel that it can't be. possible to provide good quality care, safe and good quality care in temporary escalation spaces or corridors, as they are more commonly known. Some people will get well looked after, and any care at all is better than no care at all. But I'm afraid that this so-called guidance from NHS England, the more we talk about it, the more disingenuous it looks. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you want to join in. We haven't had much yet because so many healthcare professionals have been in touch on what it's actually like to be there yourself. First caller currently sitting in a car park having had what he's certain is a heart attack. Vic describing what happened to his mum. Nurses, doctors queuing up, nurses in particular queuing up to tell us what's going on. But the reality of being in a what do they call them? A temporary escalation space or a cupboard or a corridor. What's that like, and how does it inform your view on whether or not you can actually be treated safely and effectively? It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48, and it's a sense, isn't there, growing of that's what happens next. Is that they tell us, and I don't like using phrases like they, but in this case NHS England, I can put a name to it. They tell us this is okay. And the idea of going back to when things were much better moves a little bit further away. It moves a little bit further out of reach. What are we talking about? So-called corridor care in crowded wards. NHS England come out and say, don't worry, it can be done safely. Nurses, patients, family members queue up to tell us, no, it can't. Royal College of Emergency Medicine tell us it's nonsensical to suggest this and that the whole NHS England is out of touch. But it's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. And then the likelihood of not just putting the brakes on, but hitting the reverse gear back to where we were in previous years, minimising, reducing, lessening the horror, just moves ever that little bit further on. I wonder where else we see that, where, decline becomes the new normal, where the damaged or the second, prisons, I suppose, releasing prisoners early just becomes the inevitable consequence. And the government then is charged with telling us that it has to be done because the alternative is unthinkable. The alternative is to convict people fresh for new crimes and not send them to jail. So we've got to let some people out early who should be there or have been sent there for longer. It's a sort of sclerosis almost. But goodness me, it seems to be happening everywhere, doesn't it? Jeff's in Bristol. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
I hope you're well. I'm ringing in because I work for the NHS at Home Service. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically a virtual ward, so we can monitor patients in their own homes.
Gosh. Oh, I mean, I'm not unaware of it, but I'm interested in what you're going to bring to this conversation, because theoretically, a lot of people will suddenly be thinking, why haven't we got loads and loads and loads of that?
Well, I'm not sure whether or not it's been rolled out over the whole of NHS England, but at the moment, it was brought in because of COVID, so that obviously nurses didn't have to go into the homes and do all the monitoring, because of COVID and everything. You
can do it in care homes as well, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's right. So what we do is we try and stop the corridor business, and by having those patients referred to us so that they get discharged, they come home, and then we continue to look after them. So
and this could be a big part of whatever improvement looks like. I mean, you've got some issues, of course, with whether or not the home is suitable, but that's not your problem.
Yeah.
That's.
Well, you say that, but it kind of becomes our problem because we do get some patients that absolutely should not be on their own. Yeah, okay. And then, of course, the whole social care issue comes in, like your caller was saying earlier, that it's very hard to then find them that care that they need. A lot of the time they're quite obstructive just because they're very independent people, and it's not what they thought their end would look like, if you like.
Lord, yes, of course.
But going back to, I started in the NHS about 15 years ago, and things were very different. My first ever job was in a cottage hospital, and it was very lovely, and people would, have fractures, and then they'd come to us for recuperation, if you like, for rehab, and they'd stay for quite a substantial amount of time. Everything was cooked in the hospital. Yeah. It was very lovely. And then most recently, my most recent job in a hospital, you literally hit the ground running. people are really, really unhappy because lots of things are getting cancelled a lot of the time. They're getting stuck in hospital for a lot of the time. And the one thing that sends them over the edge is the food.
Right.
Because it's subcontracted out. So that's another cut. And, you've got a patient that's really unhappy with you and you're saying to them, there's not a lot I can do about that. But they're really angry with you.
Yes.
That's their first point. They're like, this is your fault. And what do you say to them?
Because I don't know. I don't know. Ask them how they voted. That'll make everything better. It's crazy, isn't it? It's really crazy. How do people respond to... I mean, you mentioned some people weren't expecting it to be like that, but do you have positive experiences?
We do, actually. We do. And the thing is, the equipment that we issue them, which means that they can do their vital signs, they quite like that because it makes them feel more empowered about their own health. And the families can get involved as well. So they can really understand what's happening to their loved one, if you see what I mean. And we have a lot of positive feedback from families. We have a lot of positive feedback from patients.
It should be part of any package of improvement, shouldn't it? Is more widespread deployment of just doing... I mean, the world changes. The technology has changed. The ability to do what you do didn't exist when I was at university, when I started work. It just literally didn't exist, but it does now, and it hasn't been embraced enough.
No, and it means also that they haven't got to go anywhere, again, which is quite overwhelming for our demographic of patients that we have.
Yeah.
If they don't have the support, they can't just get in a car and go and have this blood test or have, whatever it is they need, whereas we can go to them and do all of those things for them.
Yeah, a couple of people getting in touch to say that they've had it. Jane says it was wonderful for my husband. He had cellulitis, 2 days in hospital, then discharged to home, but still needed intravenous antibiotics. The at-home care was absolutely wonderful. I kind of wonder, someone suggested that we do this as a thought experiment. If someone was transported from, let's say, 2000 to 2024, or even 1990 to 2024, and just invited to wander into a hospital, how shocked they would be at what they see.
Yeah.
Because when it happens incrementally, we sometimes don't notice the scale of the decline, do we?
I do work with a few old school nurses who are absolutely amazing. And yes, we have many conversations about things like that, definitely.
And finally, a quick word on this suggestion that the corridor care can provide safe and good quality treatment. It's tough.
It is tough. It all depends on the patient and what they have and the treatment available. It really does.
So it's not impossible, but it's
not impossible because the staff are wonderful. The reason we do this job is because we just want to make people better and we just want to look after people and we just want to make a difference, and that's why we do it.
Otherwise, you'd have gone into politics. I shouldn't do those jokes. They're too easy and too lazy. Thank you. And thank you. I mean, thank you for the call, but also thank you for everything else that you described, because we've touched before on the question of what would happen if it were not for the goodwill of people like Jeff and all my other healthcare professional callers today. Is it Jeff or Jess?
Jess, not Jeff, no.
It's Jeff with an S, right?
With an S, yeah.
Yeah, I've just spent 5 minutes calling you Jeff.
That's fine.
It's not okay. Fine at all.
I've been called worse, to be fair.
I'm just going to speak to a colleague very briefly. One job. You can't call Jess Jeff. Honestly. I thank you, Jess. I shall adjust our records accordingly. God, I was trying to think to myself, what could that be short for? Jeff Ella? Jeff Arena? Jeff? I don't know. And then you think, well, maybe it's a foreign name, or maybe, it's Jeffica, suggests Keith. That would be the one, wouldn't it? I think Michael Marmot, who's very, very powerful on all matters health, has been on with Andrew Marr recently, a couple of weeks ago, talking about the 14 years of disinvestment in the NHS, taking it back to George Osborne. And I think Peter's right when he suggests this is an attempt to normalise what is abnormal and unacceptable. There's something in that, isn't there? It is 11:57. Quick solution to the missing world round. Everybody got this, pretty much. Perfect weather conditions present a crop of supersized what? Yes, sprouts. Sprouts. I had sprouts last night. I do like a sprout. You know I like a sprout. Perfect weather conditions present a crop of super-sized sprouts. I'm not sure this is good news, but I am sure that this is not the moment to dwell upon it. Michael is in Exeter. Michael, what would you like to say?
My body decided it didn't like me and tried to eat me on Thursday, and I was brought into the hospital at death's door.
Good Lord, I'm sorry to hear that.
And some wonderful people passing helped my girlfriend carry me to the doctors. We're both old age pensioners.
My goodness. How are you doing now? Let me ask that first. How are you?
A lot better.
Good.
It's just that I've got double vision everywhere.
Okay.
But I spent 10 hours in the corridor when I came in.
Yeah.
What they were saying, no real facilities, absolutely fantastic staff. How they coped, I don't know. Eventually I got shifted into a hospital proper.
Right.
The other comment, you said, I bet somebody rings about immigrants. Well, yes, I will. This hospital is mainly staffed by immigrants, and their main job is to get you better and get you out. They are absolutely fantastic.
If every patient was like you,
I know,
the NHS would be a much easier place for all the other people that we've spoken to today to work from. And that's not to say everybody can be like you. Frustrations articulate themselves in different ways, and you're going to get cross with the person who's in front of you. But it sounds as if people would have been quite happy to look after you, even in the straitened circumstances that you describe.
The service couldn't be better. Actually, the food is very good as well.
Good Lord. Are you sure?
Yes,
are you sure this isn't a symptom of your delirium?
No, I am. It is good.
And you're still there now? You're still there now waiting for some tests?
I want to go home.
Yes, of course you do.
But they won't let me go yet.
Because they're not confident that they've done everything they can do to work out why you keeled over on Thursday.
Oh, no, they know that now.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Something called myasthenia gravis.
Oh.
But I know they're worried about home care because I live alone with my cat.
Okay, so they can't be confident that you'll be able to look after yourself fully and completely when you get back. They are dotting I's and crossing T's, but it speaks to all of the problems we've been talking about today. I am personally enormously grateful to you for concluding this conversation on such an upbeat and generous note, Michael, but I wish you the very, very, very speediest of recoveries.
So do I.
Do you think you might ever move in with a girlfriend at any point?
Well, we're both old age pensioners, but she doesn't live in the same town as me. She was on holiday with me.
Oh, how lovely. Well, I'm sad that it came to such a sort of brutal conclusion, but thank goodness she was with you at the time, eh?
But I'm still alive. I can't get rid of it. A man in the dark cloak got pushed off.
Yeah, tell him where to go. Tell him to do one. Thank you, Michael, and God bless you. And I hope you're home sooner rather than later. I really do. Oh, boy. It is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to homeschooling. There are two stories around today that I would like to talk about, but which I didn't think would lend themselves to phone-ins. One is the China scenario that Keir Starmer has been asked about on this trip to Norway, and the other is the Israeli government's decision to close its embassy in Dublin, accusing the Irish government, the entire Irish government now, accused of anti-Semitism. This because Dublin had formally joined South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide and asking that the definition of the term be broadened to help the prosecution of Israeli leaders. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you stand accused of something as hideous as genocide, then surely you'd jump at the opportunity to have your day in court. It used to be a figure of speech, didn't it? But it appears to be a slightly unfashionable view. 5 after 12 is the time. We're going to talk about something completely different now. The numbers of people homeschooling their children are rocketing. And I didn't want to do it last week because the decision by Sarah Sharif's so-called parents to take her out of school, I felt it would overshadow this conversation and possibly set it off on an unhelpful and very, very negative tip. We are a weird bunch, aren't we? We humans. What would you say your relationship with change was? How many times in the last few months have we pointed out that worldview that seems to be very dominant in the world at the moment, in our world at the moment, that if it wasn't around when I was younger, then it must be somehow suspect. It must be somehow suspicious. Most obviously, you get it with old people writing about, and I'm old, but older people writing about health and safety legislation as if it's some sort of novel invention designed solely to complicate proceedings or to hurt business. You get it with diversity and inclusion, all of the things that you could chalk up as progress. You get it with human resources. Well, we didn't have human resources. No. And do you know what happened? The directors used to wander around the typing pool doing possible impressions of octopuses or octopi. I'm never 100% sure which it is. So, we didn't do that when I was young. Or you look at the 21st century world through your very 20th century eyes. I think we do that a lot with property. Certainly we used to. Things seem to have got better, but you still have those ludicrous lines out there about how, they keep telling me they can't afford to buy a house. Maybe they should cancel their Netflix subscription. And you just sort of think, what on earth? So that idea that things are really different from how they used to be, coupled with an idea that anyone who's doing things differently from you is somehow suspect. I think that explains why I was a bit of an oaf towards vegetarians for a very long time. I can still feel my vestigial vegetarian negativity bubbling away inside. It's a stupid thing to be negative about. But you've encountered it from much bigger oafs than me. That idea that you have the right to tell somebody that they're a hypocrite if they're wearing leather shoes while also choosing not to eat the flesh of killed animals. It doesn't make them a hypocrite at all. I used to do it all the time. I think there's a bit of judgment reverse there. You sort of feel that somebody's doing something that you know is good and right, but you're not prepared to do it yourself for selfish reasons, i.e. I really like meat, and therefore you're going to attack them for being good and right in the hope of making yourself feel a bit better about being bad and wrong. It's just my own very lazy and amateurish psychology in play here, because I've found myself feeling it again today. I found myself thinking, oh, come off it. What's that all about? And I suspect it's a world where an awful lot of negativity is invited. And it is the world of homeschooling. It is the decision taken by good and caring parents. As I mentioned a moment ago, I don't want this particular conversation to include the practice of taking a child out of school to help you evade the authorities or help to hide a child from people who may otherwise develop concern for their condition. I'm talking about good people doing it for good reasons, because I can feel my negativity kicking in. I'm tempted to run a side order of psychology this hour, actually. Why do we feel? Where does that come from? Why would I feel the little pricklings of nastiness is the word I'm looking for. I could, and I would in a previous life, while presenting this program, so not that different a life, but before therapy, I would have been very rude now to people who homeschool their children. I don't know why. I don't know quite what it would have sprung from, except that sense that perhaps you're caring more for your children than I am caring for mine by sending them to conventional schools. So maybe is there another little cocktail of guilt and shame? Is it the same as the vegetarian thing? I don't think it is, because I don't necessarily think that homeschooling your children is right and good and sending them to school is wrong and bad in the way that I can frame my thoughts about vegetarianism. We'll do the proper phone in first, which is what's it like? And then we'll do why does it inspire negative thoughts in so many of the rest of us? So I think, and my thanks to Moira, who describes herself as pushing 80 years old and points out, you're not old, James. You're still an apprentice in life. I'm very much on the nursery slopes, Moira. You're not kidding, but thank you for the reminder. So I'm interested in the parents who do it. Okay. I mean, there's rules and regulations about children coming on the radio, and I don't know how helpful it would be in this context. But I'll tell you who I'd really like to talk to. And this is me making a rod for my own back, because the whole point about this news story is that it's increasing in popularity, which means loads more people are doing it. But I want to have a conversation about when it wasn't popular. What was it like to be? So now you're an adult and you look back on being homeschooled. How do you feel about it? So there's a bunch of questions here. The obvious ones are, why do you homeschool your child and what is it like? 0345 6060 973. The one I'm most interested in at 12:11, and I may well change my opinion of what I'm most interested in the course of the conversation. I always do in the best conversations that we have. But the one that I'm currently most interested in is, you are now an adult and you were homeschooled. What are your feelings now, looking back? 0345 6060 973. Because I've got that fourth question in my mind, which is, why does it inspire negative reactions in so many people who don't do it? And I think that part of the answer might be a sense that it's not fair on the child. That would be the nice attitude to it. But who the hell knows except the child? It's not fair on the child to take a child out of school like this, is it? You have that kind of experience of school. How could you be so arrogant as to think that you, with no experience whatsoever, are going to provide a better education for your child than a system which has been honed and evolved over the course of 100 or so years? So I don't know. Or is it that we feel judged? So a homeschooler is like a vegetarian in that we think they're judging our choices negatively, so we sort of get our punches in first. A vegetarian, by dint of being a vegetarian, thinks you are doing something wrong by eating meat. Therefore, your defense mechanism is to be a bit nasty sometimes to defend yourself against the accusation, the implicit accusation that you're doing something wrong. And so a homeschooling parent, the implicit accusation is that your own parents did something wrong by sending you to school. So that reflex nastiness is actually a self-defense mechanism. I told you I'd find the psychology interesting, but I shouldn't allow it to distract me from the central questions, which are, why do you homeschool your child? Okay. 0345 6060 973. If you were homeschooled, now that you have full agency, I don't know how much choice or how much say you had in the process when you were young. It's one of the things you can tell me. But what was it like? Looking back now, how do you feel about your own homeschooling? You'll probably go to the front of the queue, 0345 6060 973. And then the second bit of it, and you can do this from either side, either where I am now, being honest about some unpleasant reflexes, or you can be the recipient of negativity as a homeschooling parent and speculate on where that comes from. Where do we derive the slightly suspect feelings that we have about parents who choose to homeschool their children? So there's lots of ways in now. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What's it like? What was it like? And what are we like? Hey, there you go. So what's it like? What was it like? And what are we like, eh? What are we like? As in the people who... No, that doesn't work for you? I thought that was quite charming, actually. What's it like? What was it like? And what are we like? But you need a little bit of a kind of, what are we like? What are we like? You know, no? I don't know why I bother trying to come up with new and imaginative ways of leading you into conversations that you haven't had before. Frankly, I feel a profound lack of gratitude some afternoons. But those are your questions. What is it like? 0345 6060 973. What was it like? 0345 6060 973. And why are we like what we are like when it comes to those negative impulses, those negative reactions that we have towards people who have chosen to homeschool their children? It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The government statistics, which were released on Thursday, found about 111,700 children being home educated. We've got no way of knowing how many of them may be at risk or enduring suboptimal situations, but there are, for what it's worth, measures and organisations in place to check on things. But that's according to a census taken this year. It's a rise of about 20% since last year. 23% say it's a result of lifestyle, philosophical or preferential choices, such as religious or cultural beliefs, or a rejection of exam-based education. 13% say they are not happy with the special educational needs and disabilities provisions provided by schools, or that they are unhappy with school bullying. 14% say it's due to a child's mental health. So there's a bunch of reasons for doing it. Which is why I'm interested, I think, in what an adult feels about it, looking back on having been homeschooled, as much as I'm interested in what the current reality of it is all about. Amelia is in Worthing. Amelia, what would you like to say?
Oh, I'm on the radio. It's so exciting to speak to you. I'm so interested in this conversation. I work in higher education in a vocational subject. So I teach professional performers for the West End and things like that. So I see kind of a whole bunch of background of kids, so to speak, coming through. But I'm also a parent of a 3-year-old. Previously ran a big performing arts school for kids ages 2 to early adulthood. And I've seen so many different young people. I would love to homeschool my child, but I don't think there's another discussion to be had also that, I can't really afford to do that. I can't afford to take the time out and be at home and educate my son.
No, briefly, why? Because I do obviously want to crack on with people who've done it. So why would you be so keen?
Because I think I could do a better job than happens in some of the schools locally around me.
No, fair enough.
And I just see so much limitation. I've got several nephews, one whom only last week was put in isolation in high school for absolutely nothing.
Well, they all say that, Amelia. Come on. How many times when you got into trouble at school, how many times did you say to your mum, do you know what, it was perfectly fair and reasonable and everyone agreed with the punishment that I received?
I don't think I should answer that question.
No, well, exactly. I had a drink with a friend last night whose little girl had been put in detention, and it wasn't fair, Mum. Everyone said it was really unfair. I couldn't do it, and you're just like, yeah, whatever, okay. And so save it for the judge, literally in some cases. Thank you, Amelia. Louise is in Camden. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I've been home educating for 15 years.
Gosh,
so
haven't they left yet?
Sorry?
Haven't they left yet?
The big ones at college.
Okay,
the 19-year-olds at college. I've got a 12-year-old still at home.
Okay, so why did you make that choice?
My 4-year-old went to school for, my 19-year-old went to school for 4 weeks part-time when they were 4. We already thought they were quite possibly autistic. They spent most of the time hiding under benches and developed selective mutism. So we made the decision.
That answers my question, doesn't it? So the school was incapable of coping with him.
The school tried they're non-binary. The school tried really hard to accommodate them, but big schools just can't do that. So we took them out with the intention of going back at 7.
Yeah.
By the time he turned 7, we'd realised all that home education could have to offer. And there was absolutely no way we were sending them back.
And how did it work? Talk me through a normal day, an average day, if you can, if there is such a thing.
There isn't such a thing. We are fairly autonomous.
Yes.
So we don't do structured timetables and workbooks and that sort of thing. But they've, that's worked. They've done really well at college. My eldest one wanted to learn to read. Their first temper tantrums were about wanting to learn to read. So they learned to read really young. My oldest one didn't learn to read until they were 8, but between 8 and 9, we're reading far better than most kids of 9.
So not prescriptive then, but allowing them to grow into whatever space they wanted to.
Absolutely, and just following their interests.
Who checked up on you? Who checked up on you?
The local council, because we deregistered the eldest one from school.
Right.
The local authority come out. You can either send them a written report.
Yes.
Or nowadays Zoom's an option that wasn't there when we first started. Or you can meet them. They will come to your home. Or quite often we've done meeting in a cafe centrally, and just have a chat about what you've been doing.
And what's the tone like? Is the tone helpful?
With the local authority, that varies massively.
Yeah, I thought
across
it might.
The country.
And what was your experience?
Years ago, it was fine. Absolutely not a problem at all.
Right.
I live under a local authority now that can be quite challenging.
Okay.
And, want 80-page reports for a child that's been out of school for 6 weeks. And struggle with anything outside of the national curriculum. And a lot of home educators don't follow the national curriculum. But some of it is, things like citizenship.
Yeah.
We're out in the community all the time. So citizenship's conversation. We don't sit down and do written work about citizenship.
They're on a hiding to nothing anyway. If part of your decision has been a rejection of what is provided, then obviously that you're not going to be aping it completely or copying it completely at home, are you?
Exactly. And things like the spelling and grammar tests they do at Key Stage, whatever it is, some of those are just bonkers. And then you read that you don't need, PhD students can't pass those tests, that PhD students doing English. So why would I teach that at 8 when I don't need it for a GCSE in English?
And what about socialising and friendships and things like that? How do you do that side of things?
We're lucky where we are. There's a massive home education community here.
Right.
So my kids are out every day. They've got loads of friends. But they mix. It's a different sort of mixing. So
go on.
My 12-year-old has got friends that are 4.
Yeah.
And friends that are 15 and 16.
Yeah.
And they all hang out together. And there's not that, in school, you don't talk to the kids in the year above you. Or the kids in the year
it can
below
be very
you.
regimented, yes.
Yes, because they're older or younger, even though that's your best mate's sister and you've known them for years, you don't speak to them in school. That just doesn't apply in home education. So it's a really different sort of environment. And older ones look out for the younger ones, and the younger ones learn from the older ones. And it's really lovely. It takes a village, and home education done well does provide that village.
Is a village. Any downsides? Any things that you wish were different?
Trying to buy Christmas presents on the sly, because you've always got your kids with you.
Yes, and of course, from your kids' point of view, they have to spend Christmas lunch with their teachers.
Yes, indeed.
Were you qualified to do? I mean, do you see what I mean by that? It's for some people, it would be very daunting. Was it daunting for you?
Absolutely terrifying. It did come with a real sense of liberation as well, though. But I can remember walking away from the school after giving in the deregistration letter and feeling absolutely terrified, but also a massive sense of liberation and freedom.
Yeah, I get that. I can hear it in your voice as well. I'm going to read you something from Julian, because I was about to ask you about that the psychology of negativity that I touched on in my introduction, but Julian's done that for me. He says, homeschooling in Germany is illegal, as it should be in the UK. Not only does it deprive the child of developing socially, but it also gives parents carte blanche to fill a child's head with all kinds of garbage, religious and otherwise, writes Julian in Denmark.
Marvellous. Yes, there is that attitude.
Where do you think it comes from?
I think some people don't like anyone that questions the norm.
Yeah,
but I think
you're right.
We quite often have people that are new to home education. They've just taken their kids out of school, and their family and friends are all really against it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I think people that aren't home educating, it feels like you're questioning their choice to send their kid to school.
Yes, I think that's right. I think I got close to that. I think it is as if that's why I used the parallel with the vegetarian, although Rod didn't like that.
Yes.
Because when he said it's a bit of an assumption that vegetarians think other people shouldn't eat meat. It's not what I said, Rod. I said that's how we feel. When you say you're a vegetarian, we feel you're judging us for not being vegetarian. You're not. I mean, sure, most vegetarians are lovely. Doesn't care what I eat. Says you can eat monkeys for all I care. I don't eat monkeys for the record, Rod. But it's the same with homeschooling, is that we feel, the normies, if that's the correct word to use, feel that you're somehow casting yourself as not just different but better.
Yes, yeah. And it's a tricky one.
Yes.
I very much just go, it doesn't work for everyone. School's great for some kids. It's absolutely brilliant. But for others, it doesn't quite fit, and that's fine. And you can always change your mind. They can always go back to school. I think there's also the concern about exams. We have this fixation with everyone has to get 5 GCSEs. And actually, loads of kids leave school without 5 GCSEs. My eldest went to college without GCSEs.
How are they getting on?
They're doing brilliantly. They won Student of the Year at the end of their first year.
That's an answer to that. All of the questions.
The tutor from the college on their first open evening said to me they were really anti-home education until they met my child.
Yeah,
you completely changed
well,
their
I mean,
mind.
you can't say fairer than that. And of course, on the religious indoctrination side of it, there are plenty of schools that still do a cracking job of religious indoctrination. I'm not my own school anymore because the monks aren't allowed anywhere near the children at the school I attended for reasons that I shall leave you to work out. Thank you, Louise. Obviously, it's going to be financial considerations and what have you, but maybe think of it more as community educating as opposed to home educating. Or perhaps you think Julian's got a point and it should be illegal because reasons. Jay's in Tunbridge Wells. Jay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jay.
I am a single mum. I have a 5-year-old son who I home educate, and it was always my intention to do so. I'm also currently studying at university, and it works for us. I have a lot of help from my mum. But the main question that I wanted to answer was why it inspires such negative
thoughts from people who don't do it.
You've encountered them, I presume.
Yes, many. And I think there's a shame around how much children don't enjoy school. And, our main wish generally in a modern context is we just want our children to be happy, and sending them to a place where, they think it's boring, they don't like it, they're not having fun, they want more playtime, they don't like sitting still. I think many parents are ashamed of that, and there's not a feeling that we can do anything about it. It is super inconvenient.
Well, it's quite Victorian. It is quite an English thing as well, isn't it? The idea that children should suffer a bit, that it's character forming. I was looking at a brilliant cartoon this morning, one of those classic American ones, and it's the little boy has borrowed his dad's glasses. He does an impression of his father, Calvin. Is it Calvin and Hobbes, maybe? And he goes, right, you need to go out and do something that you really hate doing now because it will be character forming. So he's taking the mickey out of his dad's attitude. But we do that a bit, don't we? We do sort of think that it's character forming. I mean, the whole public school model is built upon essentially breaking any vulnerability or sensitivity that people have and turning them into people that could go off and run the empire. What about your own family? Have they greeted it with a bit of scepticism?
Yeah, I have two brothers and they have children, and they are in school and they will be going to school. And it's a bone of contention. They definitely say, okay, well, whilst he's small, it's fine, but when he gets older, he has to go. And
where did it come from, this deep desire that you had? Because it wasn't, our last caller, it was very circumstantial. Their child responded to school in a way that made them consider homeschooling. You've done it the other way around. You were settled on homeschooling, it sounds, almost before you became a parent. So where did that come from?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, there are lots of things that led me there. I was interested in training as a Steiner teacher for a while, and that's what led me to finding out about home educating. And then I've just been researching, how children learn and how, we already culturally accept that up to 5 and after 18, we all learn by directing ourselves as human beings. We're all led by our own curiosity. We teach ourselves things. We seek out educational resources and teachers just because it's human. It's a human thing to do. But between the ages of 5 and 18, you have to be taught. And it's really weird, and it actually doesn't make masses of sense.
It's a bit arbitrary, isn't it? A lot of things are. A lot of things that you might describe as conformism, why do you do that? Well, because we've always done that. When you stop and think of it, it's why some people don't like stopping to think about it, because everything starts feeling a little bit fragile and arbitrary. But you're right, in a way. I mean, I often find myself thinking that university's wasted on the generation, the cohort that go to I'd love to go to university now, but I can't afford to. I can't afford not to work, really, for 3 years. But I'd love to go to university. I'd actually do some work. I'd pay attention. I'd go to lectures. I wouldn't play snooker all day. Thank you, Jay. I like this as well from Roddy, who's in Luton. Suggests there's some jealousy in play here. We feel that the state has the right way. We doubt our own skill set, so we take the easy road of taking children to school. After lockdown, I think many realise that they do perhaps have the skill set to step in, and therefore took the plunge of homeschooling. I think that's definitely part of it. And going back to, was it Julian in Denmark, with his slightly strong words about illegality, I wonder if he'll have a rethink when he discovers why homeschooling is illegal still in Germany. I'll tell you why, after the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Chris reminds us not to worry because Prince William is going to sort out homelessness. I'd completely forgotten about that, actually, so let's hope so. 12:34 is the time. It's a good conversation, this, and I'm glad that we're conducting it in a much warmer and friendlier way than I would have done once, because the list of topics on which I used to be really quite violently prejudiced is now very, very short. It used to have all sorts of things on it, from vegetarianism and obesity right through to tattoos. Do you remember tattoos? And pets as well. I used to get really rude about people who I felt were too attached to their pets. But if you find yourself holding opinions that are deeply hurtful to other people, up to and including people that you care about, what you need to do is interrogate those opinions. So I wonder where it comes from. negativity that many of us feel when other people reveal that they are homeschooling, up to and including our friend Julian expressing a desire to see it rendered illegal as it was in Germany. I said before the news, I wonder if he'll review his position when he finds out why it was banned in Germany. It was banned in Germany by the Nazis because they were suspicious of anyone who did not conform to the totalitarian state. I read in an AI overview. So if you are living in a totalitarian society, then the will of the state becomes paramount and non-conformist will not be permitted. It is still illegal in Germany. They've never actually decriminalised it, prompting some families to leave the country entirely to homeschool their children legally. And it provides an example of a family that left the Black Forest for the Isle of Wight. There's a joke there, isn't there, about black and white, but I don't know what it is. Something about it not being a black and white issue. But as I say, I couldn't work out what it was myself. So what we haven't had yet, and it always happens when I set the bar high, is someone who was homeschooled but is now an adult and can tell us what they think looking back on it, and what the experience did to you or did for you. I'm going to free up a couple of phone lines for that call. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So my equivalent would be boarding school. I spent years thinking boarding school didn't do me any harm, and boarding school I never in a million years would have sent my children to boarding school, unless I suppose they begged me. Sandy is in Redditch, not far from one of my boarding schools. Sandy, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Sandy.
I am a disabled mum, and I homeschool my child, because circumstances found that I needed to. My eldest was struggling when it was the SATs year in year 6.
Yes.
Because they were very academic and they were being pushed to go more further to push the stats up.
Right.
She was predicted to get an A or whatever the equivalent was, and they wanted her to basically try and get 100% in them so that it would look better. And she couldn't cope with the stress. But she was also under CAMS for anxiety as well, and on waiting lists for assessments for ASD, and was still on those waiting lists. Yeah. But anyway, and so I found I'd always been against it myself, but I was an ex-teacher, couldn't work due to disability.
Being against homeschooling?
Yeah, I just thought it was really suspicious, and I didn't understand. So I'm quite academic too.
Sure.
And I was a former teacher. I don't think I'd mentioned that either. I've been a teacher too.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. And what actually happened was my eldest, she ended up needing to be what they called unschooled. Now, unschool's getting a really, really, really bad press.
I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means, Sandy.
Basically, it means you have no plans. You don't do lesson plans. You don't do any kind of structure. You don't abide by any kind of curriculum. You just follow the child's lead on it. And what that did was, because she was pushing back and rejecting things through what we suspected autism,
right,
it meant that she'd got that control and she led the way through it.
Okay.
She's now at college. I think she would probably phone you herself, to be honest, if she was at home, but she's not. She's at college. And then she was also, I heard one of your calls the other day about people not knowing how to find work.
Yeah.
She basically turned 16 and said, right, that's it, I can work now. And she looked at the jobs that were available and decided she could get abuse at home for the money that she was being paid. So she decided to get a voluntary job doing something she loved. She's got a voluntary job at the local theatre.
What?
So she basically has a full week. She's got a CV built up from all the skills she's got. Yes. She can cook full meals. She's a carer to me. She does the garden. She does building out in the garden. She's very, very graphic. And
what's she doing at college, Sandy?
At the moment, she's doing something to do with, it's called Pathways or something like that. It's looking at all the options, what they're good at, learning to do presentations using PowerPoint, using computers, that kind of thing, the gaps that I missed, and also English and maths, because we can do GCSEs at homeschoolers. There's nothing to stop us putting them in, and that's one of the big draws of this teenage years, because you can you can do GCSEs 3 or 4 times a year, depends on the exam board.
Gosh, yes.
So you can time it. You can concentrate.
So it's worked perfect. It's worked close to perfectly for her.
Absolutely perfect. Yes, absolutely perfect. She would not have survived the school system.
Gosh.
The mental health difficulties, we've really struggled mental health wise, and we've come out the end. But she's just really, really, really struggled. But I've got 11 years between my kids, so I've got a 5-year-old who should have started this year.
Right.
and there is no way she's going to school.
Why not?
Absolutely no way. Because she's this wonderful free spirit. When I spoke to you before and I described them as feral,
Oh,
she's
yes,
feral.
I remember that. In a good way, I think I said.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, and she is. She's wonderful. But schools would not like it at all. She has to question everything. Everything is why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And that kind of thing. She loves being outdoors. We do medieval reenactment as a family. So we spend all the summer in a tent pretending we're in the 14th century, and she has a ball shooting arrows and...
Is that the sealed knot? No, the sealed knot's the Civil War, isn't it? What's your one?
Yeah,
What's the medieval one?
Well, we're in a group called Amacorum, which means group of friends in Latin. And we basically show...
I knew that, mate. It cost my parents tens of thousands of pounds to give me the Latin.
For the benefit of the listeners.
Isn't it? Yeah, okay.
And my partner is the archer at Raglan Castle in Wales. So he's a medieval archer, uses a wilbow and that kind of thing.
Fantastic. So there's so many different ways. So you describe, and you don't. And as I asked Susie, I'll ask you: who checks up on you, and what's that experience like?
Well, the LEA get in touch once a year, and we have to give a report. Now, how much we comply is at the moment up to us.
Right.
I'm all for a register. I'm all for compliance. But that is my nerdy ex-teacher.
Yes, of course.
Speaking there.
I don't know that it's nerdy. I think the ex-teacher needs to know that these children are being educated.
Yeah.
Even if it's in extremely unconventional circumstances, like unschooling.
And especially because, say, unschooling is my thing, if you like. I can see how badly it's done by people.
Yes.
You know, there's people on TikTok saying their kids can't read at 15, 16, but my kid could read at 3.
Yes.
That's the point. That's what you do. You still teach them. You know, you don't refuse to teach them, but you teach them when it comes up. Like, you know, she brings me a book, I sit and read it with her. I don't say, right, now it's reading time, now it's maths time, now it's drawing time.
Yeah.
She wants to draw, we draw. She wants to do maths. And it's doing things like cooking with her.
What about the idea that a lot of people will be framing, and I can feel myself the sort of flirting with it as well, is that one of the great lessons we have to learn in life is that we have to do things we don't want to do sometimes.
Well,
and the sooner you learn that lesson, the better.
And we, you know, as a family, we decided just to make their lives unpleasant as well.
Put it like that. But you know that I'm right. You know, I mean, some people have don't want to go to work in the morning.
Well, my eldest sort of said, well, that shouldn't be the case. She says we can queue up and do as we're told and follow the motions, and that's great if we want to go and work in an Amazon warehouse. But I want to be a writer or a graphic designer or make clothing and that kind of thing. What's the point of me learning to conform? Because conforming is not going to help me at all.
It's a compelling testimony that you offer, and
we did find.
Go on.
When she started college, she was bullied.
Yes.
She's got a very obvious. Yeah, there's reasons why she's bullied.
Okay.
And she was upset, and she come home wanting to leave. And I said, what we did by taking you out of school was protecting you from being bullied.
Right.
People will say you look weird.
Okay.
That's life. Get in there, show yourself, and be proud of who you are. She wouldn't mind me saying, but she's trans, basically. So she still has a male physique because of her age.
Okay.
And I said, you get in there and you show them you are blooming weird and own it. And she went into college the next day, and we had a big history lesson about Diana and her revenge dress, because she went into college, full makeup, hair blow-dried, and this gorgeous long dress on. It was in the summer, so it was all floaty dress. I was like, okay, you're proving a point now, are you? And she was like, yeah, I'm weird, I'm owning it. And she's got the confidence, because you're bullied when you don't have the parents' support to push you through it and to build your self-esteem. If you build their self-esteem, the bullying will go over their heads.
It won't land.
And that's what
it won't land at least. It won't land at least as hard. Final question: where do you think the negative reactions from outside of your family or outside of your homeschooling community come from? What do you think that's about?
People doing it badly, being very open with it, misunderstanding it. When we say we don't have to follow the curriculum, it's this belief.
That you're just doing nothing, that you're just eating shredded wheat all day, or playing games.
If you accept school's bad for you and it's not done properly and the national curriculum is completely outdated because it's like 80 years old, it means that your education was pointless too, and you could have been at home having a great time learning about things, but you didn't. You let them conform.
I hear all of this. I mean, a couple of people pointing out that even if you're a writer or a graphic designer, you still have to work to deadlines, you still have to deal with rejection, you still have to get told no.
To be honest, I make it worse. I make costumes and I write, and I've got a deadline at Christmas, and I'm supposed to be writing my book at the moment, and I'm talking to you.
Well, you're not going to get any help from me when it comes to dealing with deadlines, except to remind you of the words of Douglas Adams, who said, "I love deadlines." He said, "I love the whooshing sound they make as they go by." So I shall detain you no longer. I will read this, though, from Jules for balance, if that's the right word to use. Sandy, take care. Thank you. I'm so glad you're discussing this, James. I have a friend who is possibly one of the dimmest people I know. A lovely person, but very low IQ. For example, they thought a duck was a fish because it lived on a river. I kid you not. They subscribe to QAnon, flat earth theory, believe in fairies, and are anti-vaxxers. You name it, they believe it. They are anti-government, etc., and are currently expecting their first child, which they say will be homeschooled. I can think of few people less qualified to homeschool anything, let alone a child. There should be checks on the parents' intellectual capacity to teach before allowing a child to be homeschooled. I know there are some very good examples of homeschooling, but this person is the last person who should be allowed to homeschool. But what if a duck is a fish?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Did you know that until the long S was introduced in typography in the 19th century, Jess would have been written as Jeff. Jeff and Jess would have looked exactly the same in the written word. The typography has fallen out of use, but a lot of sort of nerds in the typography world, Andrew tells me, has the same name as one of my favourite authors, saying they can't understand why the long S, which used F instead of S, has fallen out of use, citing that they still think in typographical terms. Well, that would be a bit of a problem. And actually, if you've got no idea what I'm talking about, I'm very tempted to leave it that way. But I did also get another message of someone whose little sister, I think, or little cousin, who was called Jess, couldn't pronounce their own name when they were little and has been known as Jeff. Here it is. My cousin, this is from Jackie. My cousin Jessica, after whom my own youngest is named, has been called Jeff since she was about 3 and couldn't actually say Jess. So I apologise to my colleague for castigating them for calling an earlier caller Jeff when their name was in fact Jess. 12:49 is the time. Homeschooling. Tom's in Shenton. Tom, what would you like to say?
I'm that caller that you've been looking for, James.
Hallelujah! Hallelujah!
I was largely homeschooled, and I'm now allegedly an adult at the age of 30.
Okay, and what are your thoughts looking back on it?
Looking back, there's a clear positive and a clear negative. The positive for me, so I was mostly homeschooled. When my health was stable for a while, I would be in school. So I had the sort of contrast between the two.
Yes, okay.
The big thing that I noticed as a positive was how efficiently you can be taught at home without all the kerfuffle of the classroom of I maybe 3 to 4 times sort of more potent education, if that makes sense.
Yeah, concentrated. I think that's the right word to use, actually. I mean, to be fair, this is why the results in private schools are often much better than state schools, because of the ratio of teacher to pupil. So if the parent is up to the job, then you'd expect something similar to unfold in many homeschooling scenarios.
And in fact, it wasn't even it wasn't the parent doing the teaching in my case. It was specialist teachers from the local hospital, the hospital school they had there.
Okay.
So they had teachers that would come out and, adapt the workload, and then the parents would be a sort of, right, you got to crack on when you can and do this when they weren't there. So they were brilliant, and it did give you that appreciation for how efficiently you can be taught.
And it was something that was thrust upon you rather than something that was a matter of parental choice. So you're not quite the hallelujah call, right? Because you can't look back and think, well, no, I mean, I'm only teasing you, because you can't look back and think, I wish my parents hadn't done that to me, or I'm glad my parents did do that to me, because that's not what happened to you.
No, but I suppose I've got both sides of it. I'm glad that they did, but also I'm aware of what I missed out on.
What did you miss out on? What's the negative?
The main thing has got to be just socialisation and learning those things that you can only learn by being around people your own age a lot.
Yeah.
When I had friends in school, and I do have friends there. But it's always felt like hard work, and there's always that doubt in yourself because it never quite came naturally because you weren't in those situations when everyone else was developing those skills.
There's a sort of osmosis going on, isn't there, that you're describing?
Yeah.
And that's why I think it was Susie in Camden describing the large community and everyone's out every day, so they'll get it. But other children having slightly different experiences won't. It happened to the cohort that were due to start secondary school when lockdown, or had just spent one term at secondary school when lockdown kicked in. And they hadn't had...
It'd be really interesting to see how they develop.
Yeah.
Because it's such formative years that you realise that, once you're well past them.
And you don't know you're learning. You're learning by exposure and osmosis.
And I think it was mainly getting to uni and just realising that other people, they just knew how to... Well, they didn't even know that they knew how to sort of assimilate into a group.
Yeah.
So
it's funny, isn't it, what words we use? If you use a word like assimilate, but then if you use a word like conform, you're describing a very similar thing, but they sound like two completely different propositions. Assimilating is generally quite a positive sounding thing. Being a conformist or being part of a totalitarian state is obviously generally... Well, I say a negative thing. I used to think it was negative. Turns out it's about 52-48 on that one. But no, I like that. And the stories we've heard would seem to involve parents who were prioritising the social aspect, which again you were denied by circumstance as opposed to by parental choice. Thank you, Tom. It's 12:53. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is from Philip. I used to support my sister wanting to homeschool her children, but now I don't agree with it. She had been bullied in school herself, and both my nieces, 10 years apart, the oldest taught the youngest to read. One's now in her 20s, the other's a teenager. They've got no qualifications, no bank accounts. As your caller said, they're unschooled, and the homeschool groups I met never impressed me. The children got bullied and had fewer friends. The lack of regulations in place and exam requirements point out how flawed it is. I don't know. I don't know enough about the regulations. Joe's in Stroud. Joe, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello, Joe.
First-time caller, so I'm apologise if I waffle a bit.
Welcome. You'll be in good company if you do.
The reason I phoned, I listen to you every day, but the reason I phoned is I'm so passionate about the benefits of homeschooling. It literally changed my family's life when we decided to homeschool my youngest son. We sort of hobbled through junior school, and when we got to senior school, we realised that it just wasn't working. He was diagnosed as neurodiverse when he was 4.
Right.
And we sort of got on okay. He's very switched on. He's a clever bloke. However, bullying, the fact that he was different.
Yeah.
We lasted 5 weeks at the senior school. I was in and out for meetings daily, making commitment promises. Yes, he'd do this, he'd do that. When I knew very well he wasn't going to be able to achieve that. Right. Attendance was dreadful. And then we had an incident at the school where I complained. I felt that he'd had his head smashed into a locker, and when he went to tell a teacher, which is what you're supposed to do, he was told off for making a fuss. And I went in and just said, look, this isn't happening. He's labelled.
Sure.
So we sort of elected very quickly to go down the homeschool route
to protect him.
And by my own admission, I knew I needed to bring somebody in that would do the maths and the English, even though I'm okay at it. I didn't want to disadvantage him. But we were really lucky because the chap that we brought in just brought fun into the lesson. So there was a structure. That was the most we could achieve for a year, where he had structured maths and English. And by the end, he was 13, he was doing A-level standard maths because the pressure had gone. He then approached me when he was 15 and said, Mum, there's this course at the local college. I'd like to go for it. Now, because he wasn't in full-time education, he had to go in by interview.
Right.
What we didn't realise that was my son's superpower was writing computer programs.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So he went to college, from that college, he got a place at university. He got 2 GCSEs, one in maths, one in English. That got him through. He did that at college, went to university, got Student of the Year at university, came out with a first-class honours degree in computer programming. He studied from home over COVID, got a job with a very well-known games design company.
So he's living the dream.
He's got 2 GCSEs, and he is I am so proud of him.
And of yourself, I hope, and of doing the right things. We need to acknowledge, and this isn't you, it's me, that some families simply won't have choice in this sort of space, will they? Because just the simple business of keeping heads above water would prevent them from making some of the decisions you were able to make.
I was asked by the tutor, who's actually a good friend of the family, Joe, what would have happened if you'd made him go to school? And I just said he'd have died.
Dread to think. Yeah.
That's where we'd got to. So my hand was forced. However, I look at this 25-year-old person that's living independently, that's earning really good money. He's got a really good work career path in front of him. And more importantly, he's happy. And actually that, as his mum, was all I wanted. I just wanted him to be happy. And when I was dragging him into school and he was hysterical in the car next to me because he didn't want to go in.
He was telling you the truth, wasn't he? I think that certainly educations like mine, when some nasty men and that stiff upper lip business, I don't know what happens to people like your boy, but I can see them being broken in the worst imaginable way. So well done, Mum. If you're not going to say that yourself, then I'll say it for you. Funny, isn't it, how different these conversations are if you make a real conscious effort to leave your own prejudices at the door. And I didn't have time to ask Joe about dealing with prejudice, but I got a fairly clear picture of what that would be like as well. I like this from John by way of a conclusion. Another good cop. Thank you, John. Some of the negative views of homeschooling, maybe because in the US it tends to be the preserve of some very strange people. But when is that not true, John? If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind Liza Radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. But now, more homeschooling with Sheila Fogarty.
Yes. James O'Brien on LBC.